coming up on the programme for you this morning. The downfall of a dictator. Syria's former president, Bashar al-Assad, flees to Moscow.
Keir Starmer welcomes the fall of a barbaric regime, but Western leaders warn of risk and uncertainty as Islamist rebels seize control.
We'll have the latest on the investigation into the murder of the boss of one of America's biggest insurance companies.
And in the next few minutes, we'll be live in Damascus and we'll speak to the government minister, Pat McFadden.
Certainly will. It is Monday, the 9th of December. Assad flees to Moscow, but what comes next for Syria and the region? Israeli troops move into Syrian army positions on the border. And there are reports of strikes on Damascus. Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer calls for a political agreement that protects civilians and minorities. He's in the UAE this morning. Also ahead, divers search the waters in New York's Central Park for the gun used to kill the boss of United Healthcare. Rapper Jay-Z is accused of raping a 13-year-old girl. He says it's blackmail. President Bashar al-Assad has fled to Russia. What on earth is going on? As you can see, Deborah is here with all the latest details. Good morning.
I mean, extraordinary scenes over the last 2 days, the last week and a half, really. 13 years of civil war in Syria, a war that had really frozen for the last 4 of them, suddenly ending in these rapid advance by a rebel group, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is now having toppled Damascus, saying that it will be part of a transitional government. But if you look at the history of the Middle East, the collapse of strongman rule, we've seen it in Iraq, we saw it in Libya. It doesn't end well. And in Syria, you have all the ingredients of instability already. You've got Islamic State, fears of a resurgence there. You've got Turkey backing rebel groups fighting Kurds that are backed by the US in the north. And yet, of course, scenes of jubilation, but signs of real concerns with the US bombing Islamic State positions yesterday and Israel now sending troops across the border, seizing a buffer zone that had been in place since the Yom Kippur War in the 1970s, and the Israeli Prime Minister saying that its troops are now fighting on the ground in Syria. Extraordinary.
And also Israel targeting munitions dumps that were previously owned by the regime. Why are they doing that?
Well, the regime was backed up by Iran and Russia as well, but Israel has for a long time been striking against Iranian positions and also Hezbollah positions, who were instrumental too in backing up this regime, but have been under huge pressure over the last year because of the war in recent weeks in Lebanon, but over the long time with Israel. And now Israel seems to be just taking advantage of the situation, understandably. The Prime Minister saying he needs to move to protect his borders. But there's going to be huge concern in Israel about this rise of a new Islamist leader in Syria, and for Western allies, like the UK, for example. The UK regards HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, as a terrorist organisation.
That's the rebel group that's taken over for now, yeah.
Its leader, Mohammed al-Jalani, he was a member of al-Qaeda in Iraq. He was detained by US forces in Iraq for 5 years during the war there. He's now recast himself and his group as this less radical, more pluralistic, more unifying force. But a key test is going to be how he takes these next steps, how he deals most prominently with the legacy of this 13 years of brutal civil war, which has seen the Assad regime use chemical weapons on its people, torture, execute thousands.
Barrel bombs.
With using barrel bombs, will this new emerging leader and whatever coalition he forms around him, will it have the restraint to be able to deal with the legacy of the war through a system of justice, or will it descend into vengeance? And you've got to remember as well, Russia and Iran. Russia has 2 strategic bases in Syria, a big naval base, its only foothold into the Mediterranean. Will it now cut some dirty deal, even though it's been in bed with Assad for all these years? Will the new leadership not want to deal at all with Russia, given the legacy of blood on Russia's hands when it comes to the Syrian war? And how is Iran going to act?
And an airbase as well, which is where, of course, al-Assad flew out from.
Well, yeah, exactly.
To
and that airbase, too, has been really key for Russia to be able to project power across Africa with all its mercenaries making mischief across Africa. So 2 strategic military positions now under threat. Vladimir Putin must be reeling, but also it shows the limitations of his power, given that his forces are so focused on the war in Ukraine. There were expectations that Russia would move to help Assad in his latest hour of need.
And Iran as well. He was waiting for Iran to do the same thing.
And neither were able to.
Yeah. Just a thought on the refugee camps. What's going to happen there?
Well, there are these camps in northeast Syria where you have it's like a no man's land, really. It's under the control of these US-backed Kurdish forces, and these camps detaining thousands and thousands of families and fighters that are linked to Islamic State, including British passport holders. And the UK government and other Western governments seem to have just sort of washed their hands of these people, leaving them in this limbo. It's a place where there has been no justice. Groups like Amnesty have really condemned these camps. If the Turkish-backed rebel groups, it is really complex, but the Turkish-backed rebel groups who oppose the Kurdish forces in the northeast, there's been a resurgence in fighting there. If there is sudden instability and an inability of these Kurdish forces to continue to guard these camps, then what happens to them? If the new Syrian government, however it looks, decides to regain control of the whole of the country, they could rightly say to the UK and others, you deal with these camps, we don't want these people on our territory. So that will be something that the UK will be very much focused on. OK, for now, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Well, Bashar al-Assad's downfall marks the end of a family dynasty that held power in Syria for more than 5 decades. Mark Stone examines the rise and fall of an authoritarian president who's been swept from power. This report contains the footage of the aftermath of a chemical weapons attack.
For nearly 25 years, one man has dominated everything in Syria. Bashar al-Assad was the London-trained eye doctor who became one of the world's most ruthless dictators. The soft voice belied the brutality of the man and the regime he inherited from his father. The story of Syria under Assad gives the context for so much beyond. Chemical weapons and the red lines crossed, ISIS and their caliphate, a migration flow across Europe, Iran and their influence in the region. When Assad took power in 2000, there was a wind of change and hope.
Would you like to take the opportunity, Mr. President, on Sky News to invite Barack Obama to come here?
I will.
Opening up, engaging with the West, change maybe from the ruthlessness of his father.
He had a different trajectory for his life, slightly surprisingly came into the position to rule, but by all accounts, he knew exactly what he was doing when he got the chance, and he simply followed. It's not unreasonable to have tried in Western states to say, should you become the leader, here are opportunities for democratic rule.
But they were opportunities dashed. As Syrians joined the regional revolution, Assad hit back and crushed the uprising with a force that the West first tried to counter. America arming the moderate opposition and drawing red lines.
A red line for us is we start seeing a whole bunch of chemical weapons moving around or being utilized.
And yet Assad, with Russian support, walked right over those red lines. He used chemical weapons on his people. Sickening images from communities like Douma and Ghouta made those places forever synonymous with horror.
Chemical weapons, for me, for the Assad regime, are absolutely synonymous with its evil. I've always said that I thought Assad remained in power because he used chemical weapons and because the West didn't really punish him for it.
And while he held on to his grip, other horrors emerged. It was from Syria that the world first saw the brutality of ISIS, another extremism which tried to replace Assad's. The hostages, the beheadings, the caliphate, terrorism exported to European streets. The West took on ISIS, but not Assad. His regime was allowed to reclaim most of the country. Millions streamed into Europe, the biggest migration challenge since World War II, the catalyst for an enduring shift in politics across the continent. As the years passed, the Assad grip grew tighter again, cemented by Russia and Iran. The country had become their fiefdom until this weekend. All this happened because of a confluence of moments. Israel's destruction of Assad's backer Hezbollah in Lebanon and bombing of Iranian forces inside Syria. Ukraine bogging Russia down, and America's political vacuum between one president and the next. And so the long war for Syria is over. A dictatorial dynasty has gone, and with it, regional power has shifted profoundly. What matters now is what follows, how Israel, Iran, Russia and Trump's America respond. It is an inflection point indeed. Mark Stone, Sky News in Washington.
Well, in a couple of minutes' time, we will get reaction from the government, I should say, to the downfall of Bashar al-Assad, joined by the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. That's quite the title, isn't it, Pat McFadden? Before that, though, what is going on in Central Park?
Well, there's been a huge search throughout the weekend, obviously ever since Wednesday morning, with that shooting of the boss of United Healthcare, the CEO, Brian Thompson, of America's largest medical insurance company, of course, gunned down in what seemed to be an assassination, effectively, at around 6:45 on Wednesday morning, just as he was arriving at his Hilton Hotel in Midtown Manhattan for his company's annual investor conference. We're into day 5 now of this huge national, really, manhunt. Police in New York combing through the streets and combing through particularly Central Park. We know that on Friday evening they discovered a backpack. We understand that Monopoly money reportedly found inside it, as well as a jacket, quite strangely, but still no sign of the gun. And then also over the weekend, divers from NYPD, from their scuba team, were seen scouring through the ponds and lakes in Central Park area. We know this team really specifically trained to search for evidence. They'll be using a grid system underwater because that water will be really murky, really difficult to see anything. And they're also experts in preserving evidence if they do find anything underwater. But really the crucial point is that they are still searching for evidence, still searching for the gun that was used. They believe it was a 9mm weapon, a pistol, similar to what farmers use to put down or to kill livestock in order to not make too much of a noise. And also, crucially, the killer still remaining at large. So everything they're doing is desperately trying to work out who this man is. They've got a slew of CCTV evidence. They've been able to follow him throughout New York. They know taxis that he got. They think they know where he stayed. They have seen a photo of his face when he removed his mask in a rare moment. And you can see that image now. That's been released. But they still don't know who this man is. They believe he's left New York, but he himself is an enigma. And of course, it's really significant that several days on, they still are searching, with a huge reward as well, up to £60,000 now between the FBI and the NYPD being put up for offer to the public. But so far, no major leads as far as we can tell.
There was some suggestion that he was a professional hitman. That's certainly what an ex-FBI guy told us the morning after. But as they start to track backwards now, if you will, it looks as though he's made plenty of mistakes.
Yeah, and I think that's what'll undo him in the end, and the police have the time, and I think they've sort of been putting out a number of press conferences saying we're not going to crack this in 60 minutes, you know, this is going to take a while. But we know that they believe that he got on a bus to New York from Atlanta, for example, arriving on the 24th of November. As I said already, they seem to think they know the hostel that he was staying in, and we actually got more pictures again on Sunday of what seems to be him in the back of a taxi in a New York cab. So again, you can see all of these bits coming together, but so far some leads that they might have had have proven, not to be helpful. For example, they think he got a Starbucks the morning of the shooting and they were searching the bins looking for evidence, but fingerprint evidence there wasn't very helpful. So really huge questions still emerging. And also, of course, the why is still at play here. We know Brian Thompson, as I said already, CEO of the largest insurer. There are some speculation that possibly it had something to do with his job, maybe this was a rejected claim or something, but that is just speculation at this stage. We also heard from the NYPD Chief of Detectives, Joseph Kenny, over the weekend, saying the fact that the gunman knew the conference was happening there, knew maybe the route that Brian Thompson was taking, perhaps that suggests this individual is a disgruntled employee or a client, but really at the minute we do not know, because it seems that they don't know, and obviously this huge manhunt still very much in force.
Absolutely. For now, thanks very much indeed for the update, Rachel. Thank you. Rest of today's top stories for you now. Here's Gareth.
Yes, good morning. We're going to stick with the United States. That's because the rapper Jay-Z has been accused of raping a 13-year-old girl in 2000, allegedly along with Sean Diddy Combs. Our US correspondent Martha Kellner has the details now.
This civil suit was originally filed back in October against Sean Combs, better known as P. Diddy. It has now been amended to also include allegations against Jay-Z, whose real name is Sean Carter. In this civil suit, a woman says that when she was a 13-year-old girl back in the year 2000, that she attended an after-party for the MTV Video Music Awards, during which she says she was raped by Jay-Z and P. Diddy. She says that Jay-Z removed her clothes, pinned her down and raped her while P. Diddy and an unnamed female celebrity watched on. She says she was then raped by P. Diddy as Jay-Z and this female celebrity watched on once again. Jay-Z has dismissed in a lengthy statement these claims as idiotic. He's also attacked the character and legitimacy of the lawyer who has brought these claims. In his statement, Jay-Z directly addresses that lawyer. He says, "These allegations are so heinous in nature that I implore you to file a criminal complaint, not a civil one. Whomever would commit such a crime against a minor should be locked away. Would you not agree? My only heartbreak is for my family. My wife and I will have to sit our children down, one of whom is at the age where her friends will surely see the press and ask questions about the nature of these claims and explain the cruelty and greed of people. My heart and support goes out to true victims in the world who have to watch how their life story is dressed in costume for profitability by this ambulance chaser in a cheap suit." The wife, which he refers to, is, of course, Beyoncé, whom he's been married to since 2008 and been in a relationship for much longer than that. As for P. Diddy, he's currently in prison in New York awaiting criminal charges for sex trafficking and racketeering. He faces more than 24 civil lawsuits. This is the first one that has named Jay-Z, and he denies those allegations.
West Ham footballer Mikel Antonio has undergone surgery after crashing his Ferrari in Essex on Saturday. The club says he was treated for a lower limb fracture and will be monitored in hospital over the coming days. The cause of the crash is still being investigated. Police have released images of two possible witnesses they would like to speak to as part of their investigation into the death of a chef at this year's Notting Hill Carnival. Musi Imnatu was found with a head injury after being attacked. His suspected killer, Omar Wilson, is due to stand trial for murder in February next year. Tens of thousands of people have suffered a second night without power after the widespread disruption caused by Storm Dara. According to Energy Networks Association, 91% of affected customers have now had their connection restored. And a man in his 40s has died in a fire in Cumbria. Police say he was found dead at a flat in Kebby Lonsdale yesterday morning. A second man took himself to hospital with minor injuries.
Pat McFadden's with us this morning, chatting to him in just a second after we hear from his boss about the situation in Syria.
It's very early days at the moment. We do need a political solution to this, and that's what we're talking to regional allies about. It is a good thing that Assad is gone, a very good thing for the Syrian people. What we must also ensure as we go through this, the rejection of terrorism and violence, that civilians are protected, minorities are protected, and that can only be through a political process. That's what we're talking to allies in the region about at the moment.
Morning, Mr. McFadden. What do we know about the situation in Syria right now?
Well, it is very uncertain. We know that a brutal regime has fallen. We know this has been bad for Russia and Iran, who were the people propping up that regime and decided that either they wouldn't or couldn't prop up any longer. And the future is very uncertain. And this group that's taken over has previously been affiliated with al-Qaeda. The leader, Mr. Jalani, has been saying different things to that. Recently, he's been saying he'll respect citizens' rights and minorities and so on. So I think there'll be a combination of relief, but also great uncertainty as to what the future will bring.
This rebel group, Hayat Tahrir al-Shams, known as HTS, it is a proscribed organisation here in the UK. Will you have to look at that again now?
Yeah, we will. And we'll consider that. And I think it will partly depend on what happens in terms of how that group behaves now. But I think countries around the world who prescribe this, it's not just the UK, the United States, European countries as well, I think probably will look at that now and see what's going to happen in the future. But we've not made any decisions on that over the weekend.
And how long will it take for you to make a decision?
Well, it won't take that long. I think we'll need to do it quite quickly.
Are you happy with the Assad family being granted asylum in Moscow?
Oh, well, that's a decision between them and the Russian authorities. Russia propped up the regime. If you'd asked me which country will he flee to, Russia or Iran were probably the two that would have been the highest on the list.
I asked you that because obviously I want to know what you think about Asma Assad. She's 49, she's British originally. Her parents, I believe, still live in Acton. They have 3 children. Could you foresee a situation where they would be allowed to come to the UK?
Well, no such request been received,
No, but
as I understand it. Well, I can't say how that would be.
How does it make you feel a little uneasy that might possibly be the case?
Well, I think given the background of the regime, it does, but I can't speak to anyone's individual rights. If somebody's a British passport holder, as I believe his wife is, but right now they are in Russia. They've sought refuge in the country that propped up the regime, and we've not received any indication of anything different.
OK, that takes me to the refugee camps on the border up in the east there, the Al-Hol and the Roj camps, which are used to house refugees, amongst them Shamima Begum. We know that she wants to come back to the UK. Might you look at that again?
Well, it's important to understand the group that runs the area where those camps are is not the same as the group that's taken over in Damascus. Those are Kurdish forces there.
But that group in Damascus is looking to take over the country.
They're looking to take over the country.
And they're likely to say, we don't want these refugees.
It is difficult to say at the moment what will happen to those camps. All of this is very uncertain at the moment. We just had a clip from the Prime Minister. He said it was early days. It really is. So, I mean, no one can say for sure what's going to happen to those camps right now, or indeed whether this new group will be able to take over the whole country. That's not certain either.
Could you foresee a situation where you may look again at Shamima Begum coming back to the UK?
No plans to do that right now.
OK. The United States, we know, has bombed some targets inside Syria over the last 24 hours. Israel has done the same. Where does that leave the UK? Do you fully support the action that they have been taking?
What I think Israel's doing is making sure its position in the Golan is secure. One of the things to note about this has partly happened because of Israeli action against Iranian proxies around the region, and that has left Iran weakened, and that is partly why the Assad regime has fallen. So the action that Israel has taken over the last few days will be to make sure that its position in the Golan is secure.
So that's supported by the UK?
We will always support Israel's right to defend itself and make itself secure. But we also want to see in Syria whether the new leader, Mr. Jalani, lives by the words he said about respecting citizens, respecting minorities. There's a Christian minority, there are other minorities there. Will their freedoms, their religious rights be respected in the future? That's not certain at the moment, but that's very much what we hope for.
You must be very concerned, though, looking from here to Syria this morning, given what happened in Iraq after the downfall of the regime there, creating a vacuum where terrorism thrived.
Well, no one can be sure of what the future is. It's interesting, in the last couple of days, I've been hearing reports of people who'd left Syria going back in from neighbouring countries. Now, I don't know whether that will be a pattern that's sustained. Maybe other people who are also trying to leave But I think until we know the future, you can't really give a verdict on what this new regime is going to be like.
Fair to say it's an uncertain time?
It's an uncertain time. We know a brutal regime has fallen. We don't yet know the character of the regime that's going to take its place.
OK. Let's turn to domestic matters, if we may. Storm Dara did its worst over the weekend. Hundreds of thousands of people without power, including our house for a while.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, it's fine. We managed. I lived through the miners' strike in the 70s, so you remember when we had no power then as well. I'm sure you remember that too. Sort of damage that it's created, what's the government going to do to help people?
Well, it's very rare to receive what we called a red weather warning at the weekend. That
Threat to life.
Threat to life, winds of over 90 miles per hour. We had to issue the emergency alert to 3 million people on Friday night. I believe about 1.5 million people have been reconnected over the weekend. The latest figures I have were that as of last night, there was still 100,000 people without power. We hope to get them reconnected as soon as possible. I'm told that should happen over the next couple of days and get everybody back on the power grid. It's another reminder of how powerful these storms can be. 2 people were also killed over the weekend in different parts of the country. So the power of the weather can be very extreme. And, you know, I just want to thank all the workers.
I was going to say shout out to the National Grid guys up those poles.
The guys up the poles reconnecting people, the people helping people if there was any danger of floods. You know, when something like this happens, it's those frontline workers that get out there in the most terrible weather and try to help people. So a big thank you to them.
And so say all of us. Why are you picking a fight with the civil servants?
I'm praising the civil servants today. I think we've got a lot of good people caught in bad systems. And the point I'm making today is that we've got huge change in the private sphere. If we think about all the companies we use and rely on, Airbnb or Spotify or WhatsApp, didn't even exist 20 years ago. They've changed our lives. Has the way the government's changed? Has the way that it thinks about delivering services changed at the speed of the private sphere? It hasn't. So we've got to take the learning from what's happening in the private world.
Give me an example.
And apply it. Well, I'll give you an example. When they started developing the universal credit system, they spent hundreds of millions of pounds doing it in the old Whitehall way. You know, you issue a policy paper, you have lots of committees, lots of meetings, they got nowhere. What they did after that was they took the process out of the department, put together a small team of about 30 people, policy people, tech people, frontline workers, said, let's do this small, don't have to do it for the whole country at once, let's test this in a really small way and see if it works. They did that in Sutton, and then they rolled it out a bit more and a bit more. It's what we call the test and learn approach, where you don't have to design everything from scratch. You test, you learn, you allow for some failure in the system, you don't get panicked by that, you learn from that. I want to see that approach adopted more in policy in the future.
Final thought, Suella Braverman's husband's decided that he wants to join Reform. I wonder what the conversation would have been like in their house.
I don't know. It wouldn't happen in mine.
I set you up for that. I set them up, you knock them down. It's good to see you, thank you. Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you here on Sky News. More on the downfall of Syria's President Bashar al-Assad. Photojournalist Paul Conroy will be joining us to reflect on how he experienced the brutality of the Syrian dictator. And what does homelessness look like? Our next guest will share his experience.
In the last 5 years, more than 13,000 farmers have left agriculture in the UK.
Is it going to be viable for the future?
No farmers, no food! The frustration, the anger, the fact that so many of them are at risk of going bust has now become too much.
You've got to keep hope because one day it's going to be okay.
I'm Dan Whitehead, Sky News' West of England and Wales correspondent.
It's scary what's happening in the country. It's the illegal migrants that we don't want here.
How difficult is this to police tonight? off the scale. Having the police speak to us so starkly right in the middle of the riot showed just how serious the situation was. The water on board the barge contaminated with Legionella bacteria, an outbreak that was first revealed by Sky News. There have been questions for months over whether the support offered to asylum seekers on the Bivvy is sufficient.
A cruel place to put human beings.
From busy cities to rural communities, we spend every day reporting on how big decisions impact real people. The last smoke and steam rises into the sky above Blast Furnace 4.
Today is a day in history. Remember Pollard?
The closure means more than 2,000 job losses.
It just seems madness.
It is a highly contagious infection. South West Water did apologise again.
This is the Revenge Porn Helpline.
They're helping terrified victims.
You've been a victim of a very common type of online crime known as sextortion.
We're making things better for people.
Stonehenge became the latest victim of Just Stop Oil.
Now I can say I've been to the orange Stonehenge.
Sky News, get the full story first, free, wherever you get your news.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
This conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
You want a job in a normal life?
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show here on Sky News Monday morning. Coming up, photojournalist Paul Conroy on his time in Syria and the downfall of Bashar al-Assad. But first, today's top stories. Here's Gareth.
Yes, let's bring more on those, including that Russian state media is reporting that the former Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has arrived in the country after he was toppled by rebel forces. Meanwhile, Israeli troops have seized a buffer zone in the occupied Golan Heights, saying it was a defensive move after Syrian troops abandoned their positions. The Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has welcomed the fall of the Assad regime and called for a restoration of peace and stability as he visits the UAE. Government Minister Pat McFadden told this programme they will be watching the new government in Damascus and they needed to live up to their commitments to protect civilians and minorities.
The fall of the Assad regime in Syria marks the end of the family's 54-year rule, which saw decades of civil unrest and claimed countless lives. Joined now by Paul Conroy, a photojournalist who was covering the unrest in Syria back in 2012 with the Sunday Times journalist Mary Colvin when she was killed. Hi, Paul. It's good to see you. Thanks for joining us. Your thoughts, first of all, about events over the weekend?
Joyful, really. I think join the Syrian people in celebrating. They've been through hell. The road ahead is bumpy, but I just think for now is a time for them to have a taste of freedom. They've waited a long time for it, and I wish them all the best with that.
But there is concern about the organisation that has taken over up until now. It's been a proscribed organisation, although we did hear from the government, Pat McFadden, a few moments ago, and he was saying they're looking at that now.
Yeah, look, I think, you know, they've spent quite a few years now, Jelani, and there's a lot, obviously moderating their approach. And I think the reason for that is if you want to rule a country like Syria, you know, you can't just specifically have a very extreme position. You know, these people have been through the last 12, 13 years of war not to have extreme rule. They've moderated their position, and the Syrian people are not fools. They are now not going to accept somebody who comes in and tries to take them to another extreme. Assad was an extreme of terror. And I think the Syrian people now are wise enough to look at this and go, if they see it closing down in any kind of extreme fundamental position, I think they will simply rebel against that. I don't think they will accept another 25 years, 50 years of extreme rule. I just don't think that's going to happen. I think that they have to find a way of tempering it to fit the society that the Syrians want.
Paul, I wondered if you, as much as you want to, take us back to 2012 and your experiences inside Syria. I was reading earlier about the suicide run that you did to a field clinic and the hours and hours that you spent with the Syrians who were bloodied and beaten and sometimes worse under this regime.
Yeah, well, we got into a neighbourhood, Baba Amra, that was under attack in Homs. It was encircled by the 4th Division, Maha al-Assad, Bashar's brother. We got in by crawling through a 3-kilometre long sewer tunnel, and once we were inside, we came up into a vision of hell. We've both been through artillery bombardments, Marie and I, but we'd never seen anything quite this intense. And quite literally, at 6 a.m. in the morning, the regime would start shelling the neighbourhood with 152 Grad rockets, big, heavy artillery weapons. And they would systematically go up and down the neighbourhood all day long, just dropping these shells into the civilian neighbourhoods. And as you said, we got to the field clinic, which was little more than it was an old nursery, a kid's nursery. There were still mobiles hanging on the wall, but in the corners they would just stack up the bodies of the dead because it was too dangerous to take them to bury them. The floors were deep in blood. People were trying to clean up the blood, and the doctors were working with little more than first aid kits, bandages, sutures. They had no oxygen, X-ray machines, none of the stuff that you normally need to treat trauma victims. And this went on for weeks. Eventually, this is what killed Marie.
A US court finally judged that Marie was targeted by the regime to silence her journalism. Finally, this weekend, I wonder what she would say after seeing the Assad family having to board an aircraft and flee to Moscow, of all places.
I think it would be, as it is for me, it's bittersweet. Obviously, to see the Syrian people free is one thing. To see him escaping justice on, he's taken the obvious route out to Moscow. I think that would leave a bitter taste in their mouth for sure.
What would you like the British government to do?
I think to offer support, look at the HTS, list and make it slightly easier for these people now to operate. They need all the help they can get. I think we don't need to go in heavy-handed and, because that has been a serious problem. It's had Iran, it's had Hezbollah, it's had Russia, it's had Turkey. Everybody has been trying to get a stake or shape the events in Syria. I think now allow the Syrian people to pick their path and to offer the kind of support that the British can offer. Political support, humanitarian assistance will be needed. The country has been run into the ground over the years. And we're seeing, awful scenes coming out of prisons, people being locked in holes for 25 years. There is a lot of actual physical aid that can be sent to Syria to help. But I think really they need the support to rebuild now, to rebuild their political system after years of essentially mafia rule. That's what the Assad plan was more a mafia than a government. There's a lot to be done, but I think also strike the balance between not coming in and trying to dictate how this goes forward. Now, this is the Syrian people's way forward.
OK, I'll let you get on with your day, but it's good to talk to you, Paul, as always. Thank you.
Cheers, Kate. Thanks a lot.
Thanks. These are live images from Damascus as we speak. A bit tricky to say whether those are people arriving or leaving, but certainly many hundreds of people milling in the centre of Damascus this morning. Let's speak to Danny Mackey, who's a journalist in Damascus. He's joining us on the phone. Hi, Danny. Talk to us about the mood there this morning.
The mood here this morning in Damascus has definitely been relevant with the last few days, one which of celebration, one where people are kind of jubilant coming out into the street. There's a lot of gunfire going on, which is part of the celebration, and that has concerned people a bit over the last couple of days, but it's kind of calmed down since the first day on the 8th of December. What we are seeing in Damascus is a curfew. So between 4 o'clock in the afternoon and 5 o'clock in the morning, it's kind of not allowed to go out in the street. There is a curfew imposed. I managed to get out around 6 o'clock yesterday evening, which was after the curfew time. I had a small trip I had to make, and I didn't see that many people in the street. So clearly people are kind of sticking with the rules for now. But there are people coming to their work and their jobs in the morning. We've kind of seen more people attending state institutions, you know, doctors, lawyers, etc. So life is slowly coming back to normal, but it does have its difficulties, of course. I mean, we've just witnessed a historic event which has seen the death of a 60-year-old regime that has ruled this country with an iron fist. So it's ultimate that there will be some teething problems at the start, and how things go from now is very important. I mean, there are state institutions here which need to be run. There's no electricity in the country. I mean, we are facing literally 1 or 2 hours of electricity per day, and we've had this for the last 2 weeks. So most Syrians are sat there, and we're in winter as well. You know, there's not that many energy supplies. There's not really a lot of fuel, and there's no electricity. So these are immediate problems which need fixing. And, you know, you have a honeymoon period now where people are going to give things time, but eventually there has to be a functioning of state institutions for this to continue in the correct way. But what we are seeing is Syrians coming together really for a new phase in their history, for a new government, for basically a new dawn. You know, we've lived 15 years of war, and enough is enough. Syrians have had enough. They didn't want the Assad regime, and almost all people in government areas previously are now 100% behind the opposition, and we want to build a new country. It's, you know, Syria's role in the region has been decayed and destroyed. We have so many migrants now who have left the country now in Europe, and the return of these people to the country is very significant, and we need this to happen in the correct way. So the economy here is really important as well, and definitely something to keep an eye on.
OK, Danny, we'll leave it there. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Will, standing by for us. What have you got this morning, Will? Good morning.
Good morning to you, Kay, as well. Well, clearly the story of the day is ongoing reaction to that extraordinary developments in Syria, the surprising and seminal downfall of President Assad. We'll have full team coverage of that, including from the various regions that we're talking about, the Middle East, of course, but also Moscow, as the team do catch up from late night coverage last night. Also, Michael Clark is in, so looking forward to discussing all of this in detail with him. It isn't just that story, though clearly it's the biggest story of the day. Rachel Reeves is off to Brussels to meet the Eurogroup gathering of finance ministers of members of the euro area. It's the first time the British Chancellor has addressed that group since Brexit, so it's quite significant and is due to be one of the speeches she gives to set out her vision for how the UK can get closer once again to Europe. So we're going to be monitoring that as well. You might have noticed as well, but maybe not, because it didn't get that much coverage, that Kemi Badenoch was in Washington over the weekend. She posted a picture with the Vice President-elect J.D. Vance. She also gave a speech, but no one really saw that speech and it didn't get much coverage. So did it fall a bit flat? Of course, that came as everyone was talking about Nigel Farage and reform over the weekend. And the other thing we will dissect with Michael Clark is some of those tweets from President-elect Donald Trump over the weekend, particularly relating to Ukraine, which have got a bit of attention as well. And that's, of course, why Kemi Badenoch didn't meet with Donald Trump, because he was in Paris over the weekend.
He certainly was, with Notre Dame. She only needed to pop across the channel. She didn't need to go across the Atlantic in order to see him. But there you go. She got the consolation prize. We'll see you from 10. Thanks so much indeed.
See you then.
Thank you. Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you here on Sky News Monday morning. What does homelessness look like? Our next guest will share his experience.
What's it like doing this kind of stuff when he's not here?
Yeah, I miss him. He just inspired me to be a better person. He's shown us what living looks like in the toughest and most difficult of circumstances.
I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's Chief North of England correspondent.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over. People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks. I've reported from around the world and around the UK. It isn't what politicians see from election battle buses, but what ordinary people see from the buses that shape the timetable of their lives.
I feel like there's no trust between the people and the politicians.
Labour's going to get in definitely, and they're no better than the Conservatives.
It is almost impossible to predict where these fires will go next. Ida has certainly left its mark on New Orleans.
It just feels heartbreaking.
Cartels in Mexico are flooding America with the drug. We are standing on the supply line right into the heart of America's opioid crisis. This gives you an idea of the strength of those winds, strong enough to bend and twist metal. Sky News, the full story first. Christchurch has been changed forever by what happened here.
There was a river of blood coming out of the mosque. That's a scene that you don't forget.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Very good morning to you all. Morning.
Do you regret the tweet, Gary?
There's no sign, publicly at least, of either side being willing to give ground. Brianna's dad told Sky News what he thinks of them.
If I'm honest, I hate them. They're just evil. They'll always be monsters.
Free wherever you get your news. How do you reassure the public that all of these mistakes wouldn't be made again?
God forbid we should have to do this again.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show here on Sky News. What does homelessness look like? Nearly 250,000 households could face homelessness across England this Christmas. Our next guest is here to share his personal story, and also Emma Haddad, CEO of St Mungo's, is with us as well. Thank you both for joining us. Really appreciate it. So, Andy, talk to me about your story. What happened?
My story, I think, is like lots of others. It's always quite varied and quite different. But for me, I became a homeless person. I think it's important to say that's only kind of 1% of the homeless community there in terms of being a rough sleeper, which I was. For me, it was kind of iterative. It wasn't sort of a big bang moment that now I'm suddenly homeless. It was getting to a point where I had to leave where I was staying. I was kind of working on getting things fixed, so tomorrow I'll get that done, tomorrow I'll get that done.
Your partner was poorly and then sadly passed away, and you had to leave the home?
Well, there's a lot that happened. I think for me, what the big point was is that I guess the emotions were kind of, I wasn't homeless, I just didn't have somewhere to stay, is the way I saw it. It was kind of the denial around that made the big difference. And then reaching the point where you reached a point, you could say it was shame, because you've got to a point now, how could I have let this happen? And get into that situation, so you don't reach out to people, and you suddenly find that you are now within the homeless community.
You went to a railway station and you were planning just to stay there overnight.
Initially, I found temporary accommodation at first. I ran out of funds for that, so I went there. And after a time, then I got some advice, and it isn't safe out there, is a good example to sort of give. So I lost things, I was assaulted, things were taken, so then I couldn't reach out to people. But I was fortunate because I found out the service of StreetLink. I was able to contact them. And then from there, I got the help of St Mungo's.
How did you find yourself in a position where you were no longer homeless?
Where I was no longer homeless. It was the Calder Street link, and I spoke to someone who was very, very good, explained that you need to be in a certain place. There was no guarantee they would come and get you. There was, so just be there and we'll see what we can do. And I was there and I waited, I think it was the third night. Someone came to me and I went straight to them, what was a St Mungo's no second night out facility, which is a hub to kind of make sure you don't sleep rough again. And from there, they were amazing. And I moved to a staging post accommodation after about 4 weeks. And now I'm back in private accommodation employed.
Emma, talk to me about St Mungo's. What do you do?
Well, we help about 25,000 people every year, and we provide beds for about 2,500, 3,000 people every night. A big part of that is exactly what Andy's been just describing. So our outreach teams who will go out every night, late at night, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night, or very, very early in the morning to find the people who are literally sleeping on the pavements and try and get them off the pavements as quickly as possible into what we call our assessment centres or hubs. And that's trying to find them a quick route out off the street. And then once people are inside, we can work with them. We have lots of supported accommodation, hostels or temporary accommodation, catering for different people's needs, where we'll work with people and try and find them a way out of homelessness for good.
Do you find people can be reluctant to accept your help?
It varies. So it probably depends how long somebody has been homeless, and if you've spent a long time on the streets, you might have lost trust in various things that have happened to you along the way and not want to engage, and that's what the teams are very good at. We work with people. I mean, a lot of the people who are sleeping on the streets are known to the outreach teams. We have got new people coming on all the time, but a lot of the people are known, and they will try and work with them every night and find ways to engage, find ways to build that trust and gradually bring them inside.
And when you find people and they want to come and accept your help, they won't go back onto the streets?
Well, what we try and do is end homelessness for good. So exactly that, trying to find a route out of homelessness for good. And that means not just a bed for the night, it means a proper route to recovery. And the longer somebody's been homeless, the harder that is. But that's why we try and provide a lot of recovery support and wraparound support, often working with other agencies and organisations. There's often mental health support needed if you've been homeless for a long time. There could be drug and alcohol addiction, there might be domestic abuse, all sorts of things have happened to people, relationship breakdown, loss of employment, and that's where we need to try and help people end their homelessness with all of that wraparound support as well as the roof over their head.
Yeah, and especially this time of year, people talking about how cold it is outside at the moment, and we have the storms that have been coming through, particularly challenging for people who don't have somewhere to stay.
Yeah, much, much harder. So the cold is one thing, and it can be life-threatening at this time of year, not just uncomfortable, but life-threatening. The rain and the storm is almost worse sometimes. When you're wet all day and you simply cannot get dry, it's just utterly awful. When the temperatures drop below zero at night, we have something called the Severe Weather Emergency Protocol. Local government, regional government and us open up lots more space to try and get people in, even if it's temporary, just out of that bitter cold. And that helps because also you can then work with people and try and stop them having to go back out after the cold weather's over.
Yeah. What are you doing now, Andy?
Very busy as an active volunteer with St Mungo's. So I assist on what they call their frontline services, which is the street link team, where, as I did, you call to see if you can get help. And as they make referrals to what is called the outreach team. So I support the Westminster SOS team as part of St Mungo's, as what we call a first responder, because there are so many referrals. We go out there to support the outreach worker to make sure where they go is a qualified site, like what I was. So busy doing that supporting, and particularly, as Emma says now, I've seen, I guess, if there is any fortunate type of homelessness, it's to be where it's not this kind of time of year and this weather. But I see the difference now walking around late at night on some of these shifts, how cold it is and how desperate people are, and it's a terrible time for people. So I try and help where I can, because St Mungo's did a lot for me, and it didn't feel right just to walk away. And I would urge, if I may, to take advantage of the platform. Anyone who's interested, go to mungos.org. There are volunteering opportunities. If it's not frontline services like I do, lots of other roles, you'd really make a difference and meet some amazing people.
OK. Good to see you both. Thank you very much indeed. We appreciate you taking the time to join us this morning. Thank you. Let's have a look at what the weather's doing, should we? After the stormy weekend, it'll be much more settled this week with the return of overnight frost and fog. It's a dry start for many, with a patchy frost for Scotland, Ireland and also Northern Ireland. Expect a mainly dry, sunny and calm morning, but areas near the Irish Sea will have blustery showers. Elsewhere, it'll be breezier with a bit more cloud around, especially for central and eastern England. We heard from Wilf that the Chancellor is in Brussels today.
Yes, first speech for a Chancellor addressing the Eurozone finance ministers since 2020, so potentially a big deal. Essentially, the pitch is to forge a bit of a friendlier relationship with the EU. Labour say that it's been fractious post-Brexit, divisive, chaotic. So this is their sort of pitch for a reset. Now, we think Rachel Reeves will say that she wants to have a business-like approach with the EU, highlighting their shared challenges, so things like free trade, economic partnerships, Ukraine, things where they align. Now, the Conservatives say that forget the EU, the actual biggest trading partner is the US, and we should be focusing on that way. And interestingly, the EU are saying that, you know, relations are nice and they have noticed a softening in language since Keir Starmer came into government, but they also want Keir Starmer to be explicit about what they want, what he wants with this relationship, to spell that out and be clearer, because warm words will only get so far.
Yeah, we saw him give a speech. Was it a Mansion House speech where we didn't know whether he was closer to the US or to Brussels? It wasn't immediately clear, was it?
I think the language has definitely softened. I think there was talk of this potentially agreement for young people, free movement. They've tried to water that down. So there are clearly conversations going on behind the scenes, no firm agreement.
That's me doing this to say that's it. OK, but we will see you in the next hour. Thanks very much indeed. Back in just a second.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Morning, everybody. 8 o'clock coming up on the programme. The downfall of a dictator. Syria's former president, Bashar al-Assad, flees to Moscow.
Keir Starmer welcomes the fall of a barbaric regime, but Western leaders warn of risk and uncertainty as Islamist rebels seize control.
Plus, we'll have the latest on the investigation into the murder of the boss of one of America's biggest insurance companies.
And the NHS under pressure this winter because of a sharp rise in flu cases. We're talking vaccinations and who should get them.
It is Monday, the 9th of December. Assad flees to Moscow, but what comes next for Syria and the region?
Israeli forces have moved into the buffer zone along the border, and they've been carrying out airstrikes around Syria.
Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer calls for a political agreement that protects civilians and minorities. He's in the UAE this morning. Also ahead, divers search the waters in New York's Central Park for the gun used to kill the boss of United Healthcare. And rapper Jay-Z accused of raping a 13-year-old girl. He says it's blackmail. Morning. Syria's former President Bashar al-Assad has fled to Russia last night. As you can see, Deborah's here to bring the latest for us.
Extraordinary. People waking up this morning looking at the dawn of a new reality in terms of the Middle East. This is after 13 years of civil war, a war that many might have forgotten had taken place, given that it's been a fairly frozen conflict for the last 4 of those years. But it was a bloody, brutal, devastating conflict. And suddenly, in the space of less than 2 weeks, just over a week, frankly, this rebel group, a rebel alliance, but led by a group, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, has managed to topple Damascus with the president, the former president now, fleeing to Moscow, and a new uncertainty, scenes of celebration across Syria at the end of a bloody dictatorship, but also signs of the security challenges that lie ahead, with the US launching airstrikes overnight against Islamic State positions, Israel also moving into further territory in the Golan, with Israeli troops on the ground now fighting, and concerns about how Russia and Iran, key backers of the regime, are going to react. They've been both left reeling by events, but will surely now be regrouping.
Now, this rebel group that is in power, parts of the country at least for now, HTS, is a proscribed organisation in the UK. We were speaking to the government in the form of Pat McFadden earlier. He says they're going to look at that again.
Yeah, really interesting confirmation by a senior minister. And also, when you pushed on how long it would take, saying that it needs to be done quickly. Of course it does. If this group is now going to be taking control, then if the government wants to be able to deal with them, they clearly have to make sure they're not prescribed as terrorists. However, there's risk there. There are still legitimate questions to be asked about whether this group really has severed its ties with the likes of Al-Qaeda. They were obviously in an alliance when Islamic State controlled swathes of territory across Iraq and Syria. The leader of the group, Mohammed al-Jalani, he himself, he joined Al-Qaeda in Iraq following the US-led invasion there. He was captured by US forces and held in detention at places like Camp Bucca for 5 years. So you'd imagine he probably hasn't got very warm feelings when it comes to thinking about the US. He had, and his group, presenting themselves now as not radical Islamists, as more unifying, pluralistic organisation. But they're dealing with the aftermath of 13 years of brutality, where you've had hundreds of thousands of Syrians killed, gassed, tortured. All of those prisoners that have been released over the last few days, they will be telling stories of horrific violence. And so,
can I just point out these pictures? These are in Moscow. This is the Syrian embassy in Moscow, and that, I believe, is the rebel flag that's being raised above the embassy there. That, of course, is where the al-Assad family has taken refuge, at least for now, in Moscow. But I did also put to the minister whether Asma al-Assad and her 3 children, she's British, she has a British passport, whether they would be allowed here.
Well, yeah, and it's a hugely complicating factor. I mean, look at those scenes in Moscow. That's extraordinary. We haven't yet seen Assad himself, and you'll be wondering how Russia is going to react. It's got these two strategic bases in Syria, which it will be wanting, presumably, to be able at least to regain its forces from, if not to be able to retain them. Is he going to use Assad as a bargaining chip? And for the UK, hugely complicated as to what to do with Assad's wife and children, given that they're British.
OK, Vinay, thanks very much. Thank you. Meantime, as we continue to look at those pictures, the Israeli Foreign Minister, Gideon Sa'ar, has been speaking this morning. He says Israel will be taking a cautious watch-and-see approach to events in Syria.
The one who leads and takes control in Damascus right now, Jolani and others, are people with an extreme ideology of radical Islam. That's why our expectations from the new entity are realistic, and we will follow their steps, and we will follow the deeds.
Let's bring in Alistair Bunkles, joining us from Jerusalem this morning. Israel being cautious, but also striking where they think is necessary.
Yeah, the Israelis are worried. Assad was no friend of Israel's, but he was the devil that they knew. Under Assad and with the Russian presence there was some sort of behind-the-scenes deal which meant that the Israelis could pretty much fly fighter jets in Syrian airspace pretty much at will, and they did that pretty regularly in order to target Hezbollah smuggling routes or Iranian weapons factories, that kind of thing. And so they don't know what's coming next. I mean, like everybody, they don't quite know what's coming next, and for Israel, like other countries in the region, this is all happening on their border. So what they're doing at the moment is they push some of the Israeli forces into the buffer zone in the disputed Golan Heights. It's a UN buffer zone, just to reinforce that border. They insist that it's only a temporary move, it's not permanent, and it's whilst things are rather chaotic in Syria, so that they can shore up their border. And then they're also carrying out quite a lot of airstrikes that have been over the weekend, again on Syrian military facilities, Iranian facilities as well. They're very worried because Assad had chemical weapons. They're worried that the chemical weapons could get into the wrong hands. The general analysis is that any of the major groups that might take over full control of Syria probably don't pose a threat to Israel, certainly in the short term. They don't want to fight with Israel. They've got more than enough on their hands trying to secure Syria. But there are plenty of groups within Syria who have a hatred towards Israel, and if things like chemical weapons or long-range missiles fall into the wrong hands, then that could prove a real problem for the Israelis. So that is the Israeli position at the moment, and they, like everybody, are watching this very closely.
OK, Vinay, thank you. Police divers have searched a lake in Central Park for the gun used to kill healthcare boss Brian Thompson. Let's get more on that. Should be Rachel standing by for us this morning. This story developing all the time.
It is, yes, but 5 days in now to this huge interstate search, and police and authorities and the FBI in America still seem to be searching for the location of this suspect, even for his identity. They've had a picture of him. We know they've seen a slew of CCTV images of the suspected gunman as he travelled for 10 days before this killing, which happened on Wednesday, throughout New York. They know his whereabouts, they know where he stayed, they know how he paid in most places with cash. But apart from one photo where he seems to have pulled his mask down and smiled almost flirtatiously with a hostel receptionist, they don't really know much more about him. And this is a huge hunt, of course, still ongoing. They're also searching for the gun, the weapon that was used at 6:45 on Wednesday morning outside the Hilton Hotel in Midtown Manhattan, which is just as Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare, had arrived for his company's conference. Of course, it's the biggest medical insurer in the US. And he was shot in what seemed to be a deliberate, almost assassination-style killing. It was a direct hit that police believe was forward planned. and of course he was killed, announced dead in hospital moments later, effectively. But this huge operation is still ongoing. Police searching for the gun. They say it's a 9mm pistol. They're looking at the possibility that it would be a veterinary gun used by farmers to put down livestock without making too much of a noise. And also over the weekend, we know they were searching, and you can see the pictures there, the NYPD scuba team painstakingly searching the murky waters of the ponds around Central Park.
It's a grim job, isn't it?
A grim, cold job. They have to sort the area into grids in order to search it. They're experts in knowing what to look for, of course, and also being able to preserve any evidence that they might find, though it would have been in there for several days at this point. Really interestingly, they found a backpack on Friday. This is one of the key pieces of evidence, Kay. Two really intriguing things in it. Well, certainly one, a jacket, which they're trying to work out if it belonged to the suspect, but also monopoly money as well. So some of these pieces that they're starting to pick together, but still the key questions of who this individual was, why he did it and where he is, we still just don't know.
OK, for now, thank you. Thanks very much. Rest of today's top stories for you now. Here's Gareth.
Yes, good morning to you. Let's start with the United States. The rapper Jay-Z has been accused of raping a 13-year-old girl back in 2000, allegedly along with Sean Diddy Combs. Our US correspondent Martha Kellner has more details.
This civil suit was originally filed back in October against Sean Combs, better known as P. Diddy. It has now been amended to also include allegations against Jay-Z, whose real name is Sean Carter. In this civil suit, a woman says that when she was a 13-year-old girl back in the year 2000, that she attended an after-party for the MTV Video Music Awards, during which she says she was raped by Jay-Z and P. Diddy. She says that Jay-Z removed her clothes, pinned her down and raped her while P. Diddy and an unnamed female celebrity watched on. She says she was then raped by P. Diddy as Jay-Z and this female celebrity watched on once again. Jay-Z has dismissed in a lengthy statement these claims as idiotic. He's also attacked the character and legitimacy of the lawyer who has brought these claims. In his statement, Jay-Z directly addresses that lawyer. He says, "These allegations are so heinous in nature that I implore you to file a criminal complaint, not a civil one. Whomever would commit such a crime against a minor should be locked away. Would you not agree? My only heartbreak is for my family. My wife and I will have to sit our children down, one of whom is at the age where her friends will surely see the press and ask questions about the nature of these claims and explain the cruelty and greed of people. My heart and support goes out to true victims in the world who have to watch how their life story is dressed in costume for profitability by this ambulance chaser in a cheap suit." The wife, which he refers to, is, of course, Beyoncé, whom he's been married to since 2008 and been in a relationship for much longer than that. As for P. Diddy, he's currently in prison in New York awaiting criminal charges for sex trafficking and racketeering. He faces more than 24 civil lawsuits. This is the first one that has named Jay-Z, and he denies those allegations.
West Ham footballer Mikel Antonio has undergone surgery after crashing his Ferrari in Essex on Saturday. The club says he was treated for a lower limb fracture and will be monitored in hospital over the coming days. The cause of the crash is still being investigated. Police have released images of two possible witnesses they would like to speak to as part of their investigation into the death of a chef at this year's Notting Hill Carnival. Musi Imnetu was found with a head injury after being attacked. His suspected killer, Omar Wilson, is due to stand trial for murder in February next year. Tens of thousands of people have suffered a second night without power after the widespread disruption caused by Storm Dara. According to Energy Networks Association, 91% of affected customers have now had their connection restored. A man in his 40s has died in a fire in Cumbria. Police say he was found dead at a flat in Kebby Lonsdale yesterday morning. A second man took himself to hospital with minor injuries.
Let's bring in the Shadow Minister for Crime, Policing and Fire, Matt Vickers. It's good to see you. Thanks for joining us on the programme. Thoughts about what's going on in Syria, first of all?
Well, do you know what? Everybody breathed a sigh of relief that this thing has finally ended. This brutal regime is over. But in real terms,
it's all about what comes next. There's a bit of caution to be had. We know, what comes next in terms of security and stability for the Syrian people. We've seen in the past how these dictatorships disappear and leave. They create a vacuum that can be filled by some of the most heinous.
And we know that, we've seen that previously, haven't we? Particularly in Iraq, for example. HTS is the rebel group that is in charge, at least for now. It's a prescribed organisation. Should we look at that again now?
I think the security services always look at these things. I think it's always best to let those experts in the field, with all the intelligence that the security service might have, to constantly look at this, rather than pundits like me making a jab at it.
I wonder what the opposition would think if Asma al-Assad, the former Syrian First Lady, and her 3 children, who are temporarily in Moscow, she's a British citizen. Should she be allowed to come back?
That was a good question. I think we'll...
Hopefully they all are.
I think we'll see where that one goes. I'll duck the question.
OK, fair enough, fair enough. You'll have a view on Priti Patel, though, your shadow Foreign Secretary. She's been warning that the UK needs to be very careful to implement a peace plan in Syria. Just how much involvement should the UK have in what's happening in Syria at the moment?
Well, we're seeing the UN Security Council meet today. It's important that we work... Well, it's something that the Syrian people will decide. It's for us to facilitate that, to support them, and hopefully bring about something that creates that stability and security that they'll crave. At the same time, it's not for us to go in there and dictate.
Let's move on to your brief, should we? I could feel a sigh of relief then. You've been critical of the Prime Minister's plans for neighbourhood policing. Why?
Well, I think hugely critical of them, actually, because he's promised 13,000 more police officers on the streets. He's not backing that up with funding. Actually, those 13,000 are going to be more special constables who are volunteers, great volunteers, are going to be PCSOs, but it's actually going to mean redeploying police officers from other parts of the service. And it's great to have a named officer.
Says that's nonsense.
It's great to have it. It's not nonsense. They're not putting the money in. We've seen letters from Labour police and crime commissioners utterly concerned about it this morning. They're going to redeploy police officers. You know, when you ring 999, you want to know that the police are going to be there to deal with it. You don't want those police officers redeployed so that they can be a named officer in a ward.
Cooper says it's nonsense to suggest otherwise.
She says lots of things are nonsense, but in real terms, the Conservative government this year increased frontline police funding by 922 million. We need Labour to match that. You can't say you're going to put 1,000 more police on the streets unless you put your money where your mouth is. Support them, put those police on the streets and give them the resources that they need to tackle crime and keep our streets safe.
In March of 2010, there were 143,000 police officers in the UK, not Police Scotland, in the UK, in England and Wales. 143,000 and some change. March 2019, that had dropped to 123,000. That's on your watch.
And now it's up by 20,000 more. So actually, since 2019, we have put 20,000 more police on the streets.
So that only takes you back to where you were in 2010.
It doesn't.
It doesn't. Just looking at the figures, and these are numbers from the Home Office.
Today.
Accredited official statistics. Even if I accept that what you're saying about an extra 20,000, it only takes us to what we had in March of 2010.
There are 3,500 more police on the streets of the United Kingdom than there's ever been, Kate. That's a fact.
You said
regardless of what it was in 2010, 2019,
you said it's up by 20,000 since 2019, so that takes it to 143,000.
Well, it's more than 20,000, actually, coupled with the way that you spend the police.
That's what you said.
There's more funding for police than there's ever been. There are about 3,500 police more on the streets than there's ever been in the history of this country. That's a really positive move. We made a commitment and we delivered it. We said 20,000 more cops, we delivered more than 20,000 more cops. This government, this Labour government, is saying they're going to put 13,000 police on the streets, and already the facts don't back up the pledge. No surprises, we've seen lots of broken pledges, but this is one that will gutter people across the country who want to see that funding to continue to go in, want to see those police numbers continuing to go up.
You need to go and have a look at those Home Office official statistics for next time you come and talk to me.
3,500 more police than ever there was. It's a fact.
Kemi Badenoch is in the US. She obviously didn't see the new boss, because he was in Paris. What was she hoping to achieve?
I think she's... Do you know what? The US, a huge, important partner for us, the special relationship, incredibly important to the future of this country and to world order. I think it's right that she's out there engaging with him, while the Labour Party might have spent the last few years insulting Trump and his team.
They've had meetings with him. Your guys haven't.
We're out there meeting with them, engaging with them. We don't start insulting people who run, the free world. We get in there, we engage with them, we make those partnerships.
Lord Cameron, who was your Foreign Secretary, was staggeringly rude about him.
Kemi's over there working very closely with him, and we'll see what comes
he's not
next.
there, so she's not. Another defection to reform over the weekend. Suella Braverman's husband. What's that about?
Well, it's Suella Braverman's husband. I remember when the Reform Conference was coming up, we heard all the rumours and all the noise that there was going to be loads of Tory MPs defecting. It didn't happen. And now, news, this is news, somebody's husband's defecting. I have a cousin who's a Liberal Democrat.
Who would want to... somebody who would have wanted to be your leader. And her husband, you can't even have unity in the same household.
In the same... Is your husband a member of a particular party? I don't know. I think it's somebody's husband. I think it's small fry in the grand scheme of things. But I know that every time somebody has... People will make these decisions. Andrew Jenkins, a very good friend of mine, but nobody was really surprised, I don't think, when Andrea went to reform. There are always people who will make these decisions, but I think the thought that there's some mass exodus to reform is slightly overblown.
Really?
Yeah.
Tim Montgomery?
Tim Montgomery. Yeah.
Tim Montgomery has been a member...
Any more?
There's plenty more. There's plenty more. Look how many voted for them at the last election instead of you.
Well, I think that we failed to get people out. That's what we're working on now. We need to convince people, give them an offering that makes them come out and vote Conservative. The problem is, actually, last time, however many people voted for them, they elected 5 MPs. They helped deliver the biggest of Labour majorities. They gave Keir Starmer a blank cheque to do what he wanted. Next time, we've got to make sure that we breathe down his neck, we give the British people something they want to vote for and deliver a Conservative government.
And a final thought, these pledges that we've heard from the Prime Minister at Pinewood Studios at the end of last week, he thinks that he can build a net 300,000 more homes a year. You guys tried to do it and failed.
We delivered a huge amount of housing in our time. I think in the last Parliament we delivered around 1 million homes. But I think you've got to do it you've got to do it by working with communities, actually having local councils making those decisions, engaging with local communities mean you get a better quality of housing, the sort of housing that people want to live in, the sort of housing that people want to live near, and you can deliver that. Some of our cities are some of the least densely populated around. You've got to look at, we saw the housing targets that came out that said you don't need to build any more housing in London, whilst you'll be building thousands more homes in Redcar. It's about doing things in a proportionate way. It's about doing things with communities and building the sort of homes that people want to live in rather than riding roughshod over them, whether it be with housing or whether it be with the solar farms that we're seeing approved left, right and centre, gobbling up the countryside.
I'm just asking whether it's achievable, those numbers, because you didn't manage to.
Well, we achieved huge numbers of homes built, 1 million in the Parliament, so we were kind of thereabouts.
Not net.
Kind of thereabouts.
Yeah, OK. It's good to see you as always. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Let me tell you about Western leaders using words like brutal and barbaric to describe Bashar al-Assad's regime, but they have also warned of risk and uncertainty as Islamist rebels seize control. Earlier, I asked the Government Minister, Pat McFadden, if the UK would be taking the group now in charge of Damascus, HTS, off the prescribed entity list of terror organisations.
We'll consider that, and I think it will partly depend on what happens in terms of how that group behaves now. But I think countries around the world who prescribe this, it's not just the UK, the United States, European countries as well, I think probably will look at that now and see what's going to happen in the future. But we've not made any decisions on that over the weekend.
And how long will it take for you to make a decision?
Well, it won't take that long. I think we'll need to do it quite quickly.
So hearing there from the government that they are considering what should happen next as far as Syria is concerned.
Yes, so they were saying it was very uncertain, but I think a lot of detail in that interview to you, this HTS prescribed group that may take over. Obviously, there's no certainty and the government weren't saying that, but Pat McFadden saying that they will consider whether this prescribed group, whether that will change. Also that it won't take too long, that this can change relatively quickly, I think is interesting. And what they're looking for in terms of whether that designation of prescription will be changed is whether the statements that they're making about protecting minorities, whether those can be backed up, although slightly concerning that admitting that there's no direct line of communication or even through an intermediary. So something to watch in the next potential couple of days.
Yeah, and we heard from Keir Starmer last night. His Chancellor is in Brussels today?
Yes, making a speech to Eurozone finance ministers, the first since 2020, so a fairly big deal in Brussels today. That would be Rachel Reeves. Now, she's trying to smooth over tensions between the EU. She said that under the Conservatives, it was divisive, it was chaotic. She's trying to smooth those over, have a bit of a reset with the EU. She's talking about their shared challenges. That's how she's framing it. So things like Ukraine, trade, potentially with the arrival of Donald Trump, economic partnerships. Now, two challenges to that. The Tories say that relationship with the EU is not something we should be working on. It's actually a much bigger prize to be working with the Americans. But also the EU say that relations and smoothing tensions are one thing, but they actually want to hear from Keir Starmer precisely what he wants. They want him to spell out clear objectives that they want from the EU, what that partnership will look like, and not just a sort of softening of relations.
OK, let's see what happens for now. Serena, thank you very much indeed. Quick look at the weather for you now here on Sky News Monday morning after the stormy weekend. It'll be much more settled this week with the return of overnight frost and fog. Dry start for many with a patchy frost for Scotland, Ireland and Northern Ireland. Expect a mainly dry, sunny and calm morning there, but areas near the Irish Sea will have blustery showers. Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you here on Sky News, the rapid collapse of Assad's regime. We'll look at how the pieces fell apart quite so quickly. And close at home, why the government has decided to stockpile millions of flu vaccines.
In the last 5 years, more than 13,000 farmers have left agriculture in the UK.
Is it going to be viable for the future?
No farmers, no food! The frustration, the anger, the fact that so many of them are at risk of going bust has now become too much.
You've got to keep hope because one day it's going to be okay.
I'm Dan Whitehead, Sky News' West of England and Wales correspondent.
It's scary what's happening in the country.
It's the illegal migrants that we don't want here.
How difficult is this to police tonight? Off the scale.
Having the police speak to us so starkly right in the middle of the riot showed just how serious the situation was. The water on board the barge contaminated with Legionella bacteria, an outbreak that was first revealed by Sky News.
There have been questions for months over whether the support offered to asylum seekers on the Bivvy is sufficient.
A cruel place to put human beings.
From busy cities to rural communities, we spend every day reporting on how big decisions impact real people. The last smoke and steam rises into the sky above Blast Furnace 4.
Today is a day in history. Remember Pollard?
The closure means more than 2,000 job losses.
It just seems madness.
It is a highly contagious infection. South West Water did apologise again.
This is the Revenge Porn Helpline.
They're helping terrified victims.
You've been a victim of a very common type of online crime known as sextortion.
We're making things better for people.
Stonehenge became the latest victim of Just Stop Oil.
Now I can say I've been to the orange Stonehenge.
Sky News, get the full story first, free, wherever you get your news.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Conflict. They keep telling us that they want aid. And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
You want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show here on Sky News. Coming up, will Syria's ousted president be held accountable for attacks on his own people? Speaking to the former head of the British Army's chemical weapons units in just a moment or two. But first,
our top stories for you this morning. Russia state media is reporting that the former Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has arrived in the country after he was toppled by rebel forces. Israeli troops have seized a buffer zone in the occupied Golan Heights, saying it was a defensive move after Syrian troops abandoned their positions. The Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer's, welcomed the fall of the Assad regime and called for a restoration of peace and stability. That's as he visits the UAE. Government Minister Pat McFadden told this programme they will be watching the new government in Damascus and they needed to live up to their commitments to protect civilians and minorities.
Our international correspondent Alex Rossi is on the line now. He's in Samalka. It's a border crossing in northeast Syria. Hi, Alex. Update us on the latest from where you are this morning.
Well, I think the atmosphere here, people are still very shocked, still trying to digest exactly what's happened, but they have been taken really by surprise by the speed with which all this has happened. Remember, of course, the Assad family was in power for decades, a brutal regime, and seemingly overnight, obviously 13 years of civil war, of revolution, it has been swept aside. So there is, on the one hand, celebration. People are optimistic about what comes next. The hope is, of course, that Syria will look at a new dawn, as what people here have been describing as a normal country. But there is also trepidation as well. Now, where I am is in an autonomous region, which is pretty much run by the Kurds, known as Rojava, in the northeast of Syria. And already there have been some clashes around on the Turkish border with Manbij, and of course the fear is that there will be further violence. That's not to say that that definitely will happen at all, but there is that trepidation. There are obviously lots of different, a kind of tapestry of militia groups across the country, and the fear is that that transference of power will not be peaceful. Now, there isn't really much of a sign that that is happening at the moment, despite these sporadic clashes here. The Turks, of course, are extremely worried from their point of view of having Kurds lodged on their border. They don't see this as a force for good. They see many of the Kurds as aligned with the PKK, a designated terrorist group inside Turkey. So there could be some of this regional power play going on at the same time. But the hope really is, Kay, that we will see a peaceful transference of power and Syria will look towards a better future. That said, people are also kind of counting the cost, really, of what they have lost over all of those years of the Assad rule, and of course that very violent, brutal, depressingly brutal civil war, which saw so much blood spilt. But you know, that fear remains, really, and lots of people kind of can't believe that finally Assad has gone. He has left.
Yeah, to Russia, to Moscow, at least for now, although his wife and children have British passports, I believe. There must be some trepidation about HTS. You sort of hinted at that there, Alex, this group of rebels that has taken over so quickly, so swiftly once Russia and Iran did not come to al-Assad's aid. There's much concern about that organisation here in the UK, to the extent that it was a prescribed organisation for some time. But we heard from the government this morning that they may have to look again at that now. I'm sure other countries will be doing the same.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is something, I mean, I talked about the speed with which all of this has happened, and it has taken not just the people of Syria by surprise, but also countries around the world. And the questions that they are asking themselves in the corridors of power is what should our reaction be to the people who now seem to be about to run Syria, certainly in the short term. HTS, of course, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, is a designated terrorist group by some countries. It grew out of ISIS initially. It had the backing of al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS at the time. Then it was an affiliate of al-Qaeda, but it has rejected those links. It was previously known as the Nusra Front, but it has rejected those links. Now, the question is, has it rejected those links because it's expedient, or is it actually taking a much more pragmatic approach? And I think that's what people are trying to calculate at the moment. Can this group be trusted? And I think that question still remains. I don't think anybody really has the answer to it. The hope is that they will stick to the words that they have been using and the words that they have been saying. But of course, there is no guarantee of that. And I suppose ultimately, in the short term, it will come down to questions of dialogue and can trust be built.
Indeed, Alex. And I know that you've managed to cross over the border now and you are in Syria. From what you've seen while you've been waiting to get in, are people returning, as has been suggested, or are you finding people are going the other way?
Well, certainly on this crossing, I mean, it's actually very, very quiet here. But I mean, people could come and go across this crossing and have been doing so. But my understanding is on the other crossings where there are, on the Turkish side, where there are big, obviously, refugee camps in Lebanon, people are either thinking about going back or scrambling to get across the border to really see what is left of their lives and homes. I mean, I think a lot of Syrians in exile are asking themselves those questions today, and will continue in the days to come, about returning, how easy that will be, what will they find there. And I think for many of them, they will be confronted with pretty harrowing facts. Family members that have been disappeared, homes that no longer exist. So, you know, the trauma and pain of this war will continue for some time.
OK, Alex, for now, thank you. Joining us now is chemical weapons expert Hamish de Breton. Gordon, always good to see you, Hamish. Thanks for joining us. It happened swiftly when it came, but it took 13 years of a bloody civil war and 50 years of a regime.
Yes, absolutely. I think there are a number of reasons why it happened so quickly. When I was last in Syria in 2020, HTS were not the force that we've seen over the last few days. So in the last 4 years, presumably, they have been doing a lot of training, preparing, and look like a professional outfit. So that is one thing. I think the other thing is that the Syrian army, which has always been pretty poor, very poorly led, in the last few months, probably, with its Iranian backers and from Hezbollah having disappeared, discipline has fallen down. And then as soon as the Russians realized that things were going badly, they left too. So the Syrian army completely collapsed all over the place. And the other important thing is this was very much a public uprising. The public welcomed them in. And, you know, all my Syrian friends in Syria and around the place are rejoicing as well. And as you say, you know, 13 desperate years. And, you know, having been in and out of the country really for 7 or 8 years, hunting down Assad's chemical weapons, you know, I'm absolutely delighted and hopeful as well. What is going to be key is the transition. And as you said, HTS, if they're as good as their word, there is, you know, chance for optimism. Obviously, they need to be unprescribed because obviously we've got to deal with them, but it's got to be a Syrian solution. And if the world doesn't repeat the mistakes of 2003 when Saddam Hussein was deposed, or what we saw in Afghanistan a few years ago, that there is hope that Syria could become the secular, moderate country that most Syrians want.
We can't underestimate the bloody regime of Assad, can we? He was a torturer, a murderer. He gassed people. He lobbed barrel bombs at innocent civilians.
Absolutely horrific. And, you know, having seen it myself firsthand, seeing, you know, young children being gassed was absolutely horrific. And, you know, he is a tyrant. He is also, there is an international arrest warrant out for him. Rather ironic, he's now sat with Putin, who is also wanted by the International Criminal Court. Putin for stealing children from Ukraine and Assad for gassing his people. And I'm very proud that myself and the teams that collected the evidence hopefully will put Assad in front of a court and he will have his day. But absolutely brutal. Hundreds of thousands of people murdered over the years. People jailed for 30 years. Some people coming out of jail still think Saddam Hussein is in charge. And all my friends in this country and elsewhere, mainly the medical community, are now really hopeful and the chance that we can get back. But they will, you know, we don't want the West to get heavily involved as we have before. Our job is to provide resources and expert advice where we can. But what is key is that they don't tear down the sort of government structures like the police and also the Syrian army. You know, a lot of the really bad people have already run for the hills and scuttled off. And there are lots of people who can take their places, but they need the power networks, the sewage and transport networks to run and to be rebuilt. Because the other thing Assad did is absolutely destroyed his country. You know, there's no running water in northwest Syria, and certainly hadn't been for about 10 years or so. So a lot to do, but at the moment, great celebrations yesterday. Today is the time when people really need to get down and see what we can do to help. But ultimately, this has got to be a Syrian-led, Arab-led solution. And at the moment, we're all keeping our fingers crossed and being very hopeful.
Talk to me a little bit more about the rebel group HTS, which is in power, in control at least for now. You say that they have changed their spots over the years.
Well, from what I've seen, Kay, when I first went into Syria in 2013, and al-Nusra, the Al-Qaeda, and also ISIS were around, they were horrific. I managed to avoid them. Many others didn't. But certainly when 2015, when HTS took over, myself and David Knott were helping to rescue children from Aleppo, and they did not hinder that. The last time I was in Syria in 2019 and 2020, they seemed to be a different organisation. Even in those days, they were trying to convince certainly the medical networks we were helping that they were there in a political moderate entity. Now, you can very well say those things. What they're saying now is the same. And Syria was always a secular and moderate country. And it's key that all the various factions are bought into this. And if it requires somebody like their leader, Abu Muhammad al-Jilani, to do that, then so be it. But I think, you know, we need to give them a chance. They're saying the right things. The people of Syria are absolutely delighted and want to make things work. But it's going to be a challenge. And the key thing is, I think that the West helps where it can, but again, it's got to be a Syrian-led transition. And hopefully the Arab world, particularly the Saudis and others, will get heavily involved so that they can come out with a solution that works for everybody in Syria and also is supported in the region.
Yeah, I mean, this really did happen at warp speed, didn't it? It looked as though he was absolutely untouchable. Now he's in Moscow with his family. I don't know what you know about his wife, Asma. She is British. They have 3 children, I believe, also British passports. How much can she be held responsible for what happened over the last 13 years?
Well, I mean, that's a really difficult question. I know there's a lot of talk about, yes, she is ostensibly British, and I'm sure she's, you know, a perfectly decent person. However, she has been married to Assad for all those years. Assad is a tyrant, and you know, I'm afraid she is complicit. If she didn't want to be involved, she could have moved. I mean, I'm probably oversimplifying the matter, But yeah, I think everybody close to Assad, everybody who's supported him, and there are rather a lot of people in this country. We've discussed before, various professors at various universities in this country who have damned people like me and David Knott for helping Syrians, but at the same time, they've been supporting the Assad regime. Yeah, and let's hope they are feeling pretty stupid today. I think the other thing, Kay, that a lot of people are talking about is Assad's chemical weapons. We know that there are still a lot of chemical weapons in the country, and they need to be secured as soon as possible. There are reports the Israelis have already attacked many of these places, but the UN and the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, I hope, are ready to go in there and secure them and destroy them, make sure that they can't fall into the wrong hands.
As you say, the Israelis are already targeting several of those chemical weapons dumps, but you're an expert. You know that there's plenty more left there.
Well, there are certainly, there were until a few weeks ago, large stocks probably of the nerve agent sarin, which Assad used frequently against his own people. And they need to be removed because it would be horrific if ISIS or other terror groups got hold of them. It would appear that the Israelis know exactly where they are. I expect Western intelligence does as well. But this is a job for the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. They removed Assad's declared stockpile in 2014, but there was still a lot left over, which we saw used against civilians many times. A couple of times the US and the UK did bomb those facilities, but they need to be secured, with a sense of urgency. But I'm sure that the UN and the Israelis and others will be aboard this to make sure that they do not fall into those wrong hands.
OK, for now, thanks very much indeed. Always a pleasure to talk to you, Hamish. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Still to come on The Breakfast Show, we'll have all today's top stories. Just want to bring you some breaking news, though. 4 people have been killed in a military helicopter crash during a training flight. That's from the Reuters news agency. They're referring to a local governor speaking to NTV. But the latest we're hearing is that 4 military personnel killed in a helicopter crash during a training flight in southwestern Turkey. We'll get more on that and update you. Also, we'll be telling you more about the UK preparing 5 million doses of a bird flu vaccine to combat any potential pandemic. Would you take it? Stay tuned for more.
What's it like doing this kind of stuff when he's not here?
Yeah, I miss him. He just inspired me to be a better person. He's shown us what living looks like in the toughest and most difficult of circumstances.
I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's Chief North of England correspondent.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over. People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks. I've reported from around the world and around the UK. It isn't what politicians see from election battle buses, but what ordinary people see from the buses that shape the timetable of their lives.
I feel like there's no trust between the people and the politicians.
Labour's going to get in definitely, and they're no better than the Conservatives.
It is almost impossible to predict where these fires will go next. Ida has certainly left its mark on New Orleans.
It just feels heartbreaking.
Cartels in Mexico are flooding America with the drug. We are standing on the supply line right into the heart of America's opioid crisis. This gives you an idea of the strength of those winds, strong enough to bend and twist metal. Sky News, the full story first. Christchurch has been changed forever by what happened here.
There was a river of blood coming out of the mosque. That's a scene that you don't forget.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away? A very good morning to you all. Morning.
Do you regret the tweet, Gary?
There's no sign, publicly at least, of either side being willing to give ground. Brianna's dad told Sky News what he thinks of them.
If I'm honest, I hate them. They're just evil. They'll always be monsters.
Free wherever you get your news. How do you reassure the public that all of these mistakes wouldn't be made again?
God forbid we should have to do this again.
All right,
gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show here on Sky News Monday morning. The UK is preparing 5 million doses of bird flu vaccine to prepare for a potential pandemic. Let's speak now to Sir Andrew Pollard, Chairperson of the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation. Good to see you. Thank you for joining us this morning. What's going on?
Well, this is purchase of bird flu vaccine. So this is for a type of influenza called H5, which has been spreading actually for several decades. But just in the last 2 years, there's been a lot more spread amongst wild birds and poultry, but more worryingly, transmission into various mammals. And at this moment, we're seeing across 49 states in the US that there are poultry flocks affected. And in 15 states, there's transmission in cattle, with some spread to humans. There's been 57 human cases, but all of those have been linked to spread from animals that have been affected. There has just, at the end of last month, been one case in Canada of a teenager who became critically ill with this particular strain of influenza. And we don't know how he acquired it. So there isn't so far evidence of person-to-person spread, but it's worrying just because there's so much of this virus about. And if we look over the last 20 years, quite a high proportion of people have died who have acquired it from animals, so about 50%.
How effective is the vaccine?
Well, the vaccine that has been purchased here and that's available is based on strains which have currently circulated. What we don't know is if it does start transmitting in humans, how well matched it will be. But the vaccine is expected to prevent the most severe disease and deaths. But it would be necessary to then develop an updated vaccine for the strain that then finally did emerge, if it ever does. And of course, it might not be this virus that does spread in humans.
OK, and you say that humans that have contracted it, it's proved fatal 50% of the time?
Well, not in the cases in the US, where they've actually been very mild infections.
Okay.
In the 57 or so individuals who were documented, apart from this one teenager in Canada. But if we look over the last 20 years of this type of influenza virus, it's had quite a high mortality. But as I say, this current outbreak, which we're particularly worried about in animals in the US, the small number of human cases have been mild.
We've been talking about bird flu for donkey's years, though, haven't we? Why are you so concerned about it this time?
Well, we've remained concerned about it, and it actually has been on the top of the risk register for pandemics over the last 20 years. But the reason why we're more worried about it this time is because it's been able to transmit amongst different mammals. We've seen it in seals and dolphins, in aquatic mammals. Even here in the UK, it's been in foxes, and there's been various other types of mammal populations. In the US, there's a case of unpasteurized milk being drunk by cats, and a number of cats dying from this virus. And so that's telling us that it's able to adapt and transmit amongst mammals. And of course, we are also mammals. And so that's why this is particularly worrying at this stage, just because of the spread in mammal populations of this virus.
And could we catch it from contaminated milk?
Well, we don't know the answer to that question, but in the US, as I said, the contaminated milk from the infected cattle does contain the virus and has led to infections in cats. So it's certainly possible that if humans were drinking unpasteurized milk, then they could be exposed and acquire it, just as these people in contact with cattle in the US have acquired it. So I think the answer is we need to continue to use pasteurized milk that has actually been treated to kill viruses like this.
And how close are we to rolling out this vaccine, do you think?
Well, we don't have a large amount of transmission of this virus in the UK at the moment. It's not confined to North America, but the large transmission in mammals that currently is happening there. There have been some livestock, when I say livestock, I mean poultry in the UK, who've been infected over the last few months. But this is not on large scale at the moment here in the way it is in the US. So really these vaccines are available to be deployed if we saw evidence of transmission in humans.
And if you've had the flu vaccine this year, do you have some level of protection?
Well, this is very separate from the seasonal flu that actually is going up at the moment and affecting our hospitals. The reason why this is worrying is because it's a virus that we just haven't seen before, and therefore the current vaccines don't protect against it because they're for the seasonal viruses that circulate every year. So it really is the potential for pandemic spread in a population that's completely naive to this new influenza virus. That is why we're on such high alert about it.
Why are you in Kathmandu?
I'm in Kathmandu at a conference about infections that affect children here particularly, because I've been working for the last 20 years on typhoid and paratyphoid, which affect huge numbers of children in this region.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks for taking the time to join us. Thank you. Coming up in the next hour, we're going to be talking about ruby slippers. There's no place like home. Stay tuned for more.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
morning, everybody. It is 9 o'clock. Coming up on the programme for you, a new era has begun in Syria, but how will the world deal with the rebel group that removed Bashar al-Assad? The UK government told this programme it's reviewing their terror status.
Keir Starmer welcomes the fall of a barbaric regime, but Western leaders warn of risk and uncertainty as Islamist rebels seize control.
Plus, we'll have the latest on the investigation into the murder of the boss of one of America's biggest insurance companies.
And a Christmas appeal from the voice behind one of the season's biggest musical hits. We'll speak to Noddy from Slade.
Certainly will. Looking forward to that. And his missus. It's Monday, the 9th of December. Rebels celebrate in Syria. So will the UK now review the terror status attached to the main group that helped bring Assad down?
We'll consider that, and I think it will partly depend on what happens in terms of how that group behaves now.
In Moscow, the rebel flag is raised above the Syrian embassy.
Syria's fallen president is said to be in the Russian capital after reports Moscow gave him asylum.
Also ahead, divers search the waters in New York Central Park for the gun used to kill the boss of United Healthcare. Rapper Jay-Z is accused of raping a 13-year-old girl. He says it's blackmail. It's that time. Noddy joins us to talk about his Christmas appeal. Deborah's here with us to talk about Syria's former President Bashar al-Assad. He's fled to Russia. In Damascus, cheering crowds celebrated his downfall. Assad and his father before him ruled Syria for more than half a century. The group that's taken over, the rebels, have been prescribed as a terror group here in the UK. Will they change their minds now? I put that to the government this morning.
We'll consider that, and I think it will partly depend on what happens in terms of how that group behaves now. But I think countries around the world who prescribed this, it's not just the UK, the United States, European countries as well, I think probably will look at that now and see what's going to happen in the future. But we've not made any decisions on that over the weekend.
And how long will it take for you to make a decision?
Well, it won't take that long. I think we'll need to do it quite quickly.
I sure do.
Well, the former head of MI6 was saying yesterday that that's what he would be advising, that the government really needs to reconsider this terror status, because otherwise they're not going to be able to deal with or even talk to the emerging transitional government on the ground, the reality on the ground in Syria. But there are legitimate questions, though, about this group and the members of it. Its leader had been part of al-Qaeda in Iraq, fighting against the US-led invasion there. He'd been detained in a US prison for 5 years, much like Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the former head of Islamic State. And then he joined together with Baghdadi as part of that reign of terror, that caliphate that captured swathes of Iraq and Syria. But then he has sort of moved away from that radical Islamist roots of his, and this group, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, yes, it has, its members have had links with al-Qaeda, but they are now trying to present themselves much more as a pluralistic, unifying force. But clearly, as Pat McFadden was saying to you, it's going to hinge on how they behave going forwards.
Absolutely. We were talking to Hamish de Bretton-Gordon. He said there's no choice. That's exactly what the British government has to do. Also interesting that Pat McFadden was saying they'll have to make that decision quite quickly.
Well, yes, because I mean the situation's happening. The changes are happening so fast. I mean, government policymakers won't have got their head around what happened yesterday, let alone what they need to do tomorrow. And I think other governments around the world are also grappling with this. But it really does feel as though you feel as though how sidelined the UK is, and relatively irrelevant to what's happening on the ground in Syria now, and contrast that to 2013 when you had Bashar al-Assad using chemical weapons against his people, a red line crossed that Barack Obama, who was president of the US at the time, had set. And the world was watching the UK at that time, and that vote on whether or not to intervene, the UK blinked, the US blinked, Russia then moved to fill the gap, propped up the Assad regime, and now here we are suddenly with its collapse and all the consequences of that. And like I said, the UK pretty sidelined.
Yeah, Barack Obama never forgave David Cameron for that, I don't think. For now, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. The flag of the Syrian opposition has been raised above the embassy in Moscow. Let's get more, should we, as we look at those images for you. We know that Bashar al-Assad and his family are reported to be in Moscow as we speak. Ivor is there for us. Hi, Ivor. So it looks as though they've fled to Moscow, at least for now.
Yeah, morning, Kay. That's right. We still haven't actually seen Assad, still no concrete evidence that he and his family are in the Russian capital, and there's still no official confirmation from the Kremlin. But we are expecting to hear from the Kremlin in the very near future, so we will probably get an update. However, I think it's pretty safe to assume that these reports are accurate because they have come from Russian state media, a number of outlets here which are quoting a Kremlin source, so normally that information is pretty solid. It's no surprise that he would come here after the expectation that he would have come here had he managed to get out of Syria safely, because Russia has been a strong supporter of the Assad regime, doing a lot to prop it up over the last 9-10 years during the civil war in Syria, intervening there a number of times. As for what this means for Moscow, well, it's not good, clearly. Their man has lost, so on the one hand, it's embarrassing for Vladimir Putin, but it's also potentially very damaging because the Assad regime was a very important strategic ally for Moscow. Assad allowed Russia to keep 2 military bases in Syria, and the future of those bases will now be the Kremlin's primary concern. Reports here suggest that a deal has been struck between Moscow and the Syrian opposition leaders to guarantee the safety of those bases, and if that's true, that would be a huge relief for Russia because they provide a foothold for Moscow in that region and a jumping-off point for military operations also in Africa as well. So an important way to leverage influence in the region. And Moscow certainly wouldn't want to lose them. But however, there are some still questions around this potential deal. We don't know how long it's going to last, that guarantee of safety. There are also some other reports emerging here among Russian military bloggers that suggest the situation on the ground around those bases is still pretty tense, still pretty fluid. So definitely one to watch. So clearly still a lot remains at stake for Russia here, while for Assad and his family, a life in the Russian capital awaits, it seems.
Let's see. For now, thanks very much indeed, Ivor. Thank you. Let's take you from Russia to the United States. What's happening in Central Park?
Well, over the weekend, police divers were searching a lake in Central Park as they continue now, day 5 in that hunt for the gunman who assassinated Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare, the US's biggest medical insurance company, in that horrendous, heinous and really blatant, of course, shooting on Wednesday morning around 6:45 when Brian Thompson got out of a taxi and was heading into a Hilton hotel in Midtown in Manhattan when he was shot several times. The suspect, the police, they know what he looks like. They've seen pictures of him, rare images where he removed his mask from his face, and they've issued those photos, as you can see there, the NYPD sharing them far and wide. They've been able to track the suspect's movements around the 10 days before the shooting, but they still don't know who this man is. They don't know where he is now. They know that he headed towards a bus station that would suggest he then left New York City around 45 minutes or so after the shooting on Wednesday morning. And they also don't know why he did this, why he carried out this shooting, though they do say it seems to have been very much pre-planned and premeditated. But as I mentioned, Central Park over the weekend, we saw dive teams from the NYPD scuba team going through that water. It must have been very cold, murky water as well, so really difficult to see. But of course, these guys are the experts. They'd have split the water up into grid sections, effectively combing through, desperate to find any evidence and then to try and secure and preserve it. We know the day before, on Friday, they also found a backpack after a search and a scour through Central Park, and that backpack is thought to have been belonged by the suspect. They found, according to a number of US media sources, a Tommy Hilfiger jacket and Monopoly money as well. So, bizarrely, these small clues seem to have been left. Also, there's some in an alleyway near where the shooting took place. They found a bottle of water, maybe a wrapper, also possibly a burner phone. So all of these things are being searched, looking for DNA evidence, fingerprints, anything that they can. But as it is now, as I say, 5 days in, this killer, this suspect is still at large, and it's a huge operation, multi-state, NYPD, the FBI as well involved, and a £60,000 reward currently on offer for anyone with information.
OK, for now, thanks very much. Thank you. Rest of today's news for you now. Here's Gareth.
Yes, good morning. We'll start with the rapper Jay-Z because he's been accused of raping a 13-year-old girl in 2000, allegedly along with Sean Diddy Combs. Our US correspondent Martha Kellner has more details now.
This civil suit was originally filed back in October against Sean Combs, better known as P. Diddy. It has now been amended to also include allegations against Jay-Z, whose real name is Sean Carter. In this civil suit, a woman says that when she was a 13-year-old girl back in the year 2000, that she attended an after-party for the MTV Video Music Awards, during which she says she was raped by Jay-Z and P. Diddy. She says that Jay-Z removed her clothes, pinned her down and raped her while P. Diddy and an unnamed female celebrity watched on. She says she was then raped by P. Diddy as Jay-Z and this female celebrity watched on once again. Jay-Z has dismissed in a lengthy statement these claims as idiotic. He's also attacked the character and legitimacy of the lawyer who has brought these claims. In his statement, Jay-Z directly addresses that lawyer. He says, "These allegations are so heinous in nature that I implore you to file a criminal complaint, not a civil one. Whomever would commit such a crime against a minor should be locked away. Would you not agree? My only heartbreak is for my family. My wife and I will have to sit our children down, one of whom is at the age where her friends will surely see the press and ask questions about the nature of these claims and explain the cruelty and greed of people. My heart and support goes out to true victims in the world who have to watch how their life story is dressed in costume for profitability by this ambulance chaser in a cheap suit." The wife, which he refers to, is, of course, Beyoncé, whom he's been married to since 2008 and been in a relationship for much longer than that. As for P. Diddy, he's currently in prison in New York awaiting criminal charges for sex trafficking and racketeering. He faces more than 24 civil lawsuits. This is the first one that has named Jay-Z, and he denies those allegations.
The West Ham footballer Mikel Antonio has undergone surgery after crashing his Ferrari in Essex on Saturday. The club says he was treated for a lower limb fracture and will be monitored in hospital over the coming days. The cause of that crash still being investigated. Police have released images of two possible witnesses they would like to speak to as part of their investigation into the death of a chef at this year's Notting Hill Carnival. Musi Umnentu was found with a head injury after being attacked. A suspected killer, Omar Wilson, is due to stand trial for murder in February next year. Tens of thousands of people have suffered a second night without power after the widespread disruption caused by Storm Dara. According to the Energy Networks Association, around 66,000 homes are still without power this morning. A man in his 40s has died in a fire in Cumbria. Police say he was found dead at a flat in Kirkby Lonsdale yesterday morning. A second man took himself to hospital with minor injuries.
We were chatting about Storm Dara there, weren't we? It's more or less gone now after that stormy weekend. It's going to be much more settled this week with the return of overnight frost and fog. It's a dry start for many, with a patchy frost for Scotland, Ireland and Northern Ireland. Expect a mainly dry, sunny and calm morning. Now, when you hear this song, what do you think of? The Slade classic was released 50 years ago, and it's played in 139 countries every Christmas. The man behind it, Noddy Holder, and his wife Susan are with us now. Hello to you both.
Good morning, Kay.
Good morning, good morning. How do you feel when you hear that, Noddy?
I think a beautiful song, beautifully sung.
I couldn't agree with you more. What do you think, Susan?
I think it's marvellous. Of course I do. Of course I do, yes. I never get bothered by it when I'm trying to do the Christmas shopping. Never bothers me at all.
I once said to, I think it was Neil Diamond, and I said, who was it who sang American Pie? I can't remember now.
Don McLean.
Exactly. Thank you, Andrew. When I once said to him, you know, what does it mean to you? And he said, it means never having to work again. Is it the same for you?
Yeah. Well, it's certainly a good pension plan, that's for sure. When it was released 51 years ago, oh my word, we never realised it would still be going on that long. But it has proved to be a pension plan, that's for sure.
Fantastic. Most reliable one you can get nowadays, I think, so that's good.
Tell me about the hospice work that you're doing.
So we're patrons of East Cheshire Hospice, and we found there was a local artist who made these incredible sculptures, and I know that everyone would like to have like a little bit of Noddy Holder at Christmas, and there's only one, and I'm not sharing him. So we commissioned this, and for £10 a ticket, you can win this amazing Noddy Holder sculpture by Patty Cowan. If you go to the East Cheshire website, eastcheshirehospice.org.uk, £10 a ticket, and you can have him for Christmas. And I just think it's an amazing piece of artwork, and obviously captures Nod in his kind of 70s, 1973 glory.
Oh,
isn't it beautiful?
It's absolutely I love it. Now, I do want to just...
Are you going to buy a ticket, Kay?
Absolutely. Goes with that.
Are you going to put him on top of your Christmas tree?
I'll probably have one on the Christmas tree and one on the mantelpiece. How does that sound? You're better now, but you've been a bit poorly, haven't you? You had esophageal cancer.
I did have esophageal cancer, and that was 5 years ago, and at the moment they're still keeping a check on me. I'm on a level playing field at the moment, after, at the time, being diagnosed with 6 months to live. So I've lasted the course, as it were. So I'm very grateful to everybody at the Christie Hospital in Manchester for keeping me alive, basically.
They do amazing work, though, don't they? They've looked after my sister recently, so absolutely. I absolutely second that. Noddy, Susan, tell me about the hospice that you're involved with, and the fact that you I think you're patrons, aren't you? Why particularly this hospice? What's attracted you to it?
Well, it was through the Christie Hospital really that we kind of got to know the people who worked at the hospice and the kind of work they do there, and we just we discovered, obviously, as you do when you find out about these things, that hospices don't get government funding, and everything they do needs kind of so much money to do the work that they. It's essential work that they do, and hospices all over the country do amazing work, but East Cheshire in particular have a fantastic ethos where they look after people so perfectly, and we've been to visit people there who are their patients, and it's such a warm and comfortable and happy place considering what people are going through, and it's just something we just wanted to get involved in.
We didn't realise how much money per day hospices need to stay afloat. So as much as we can do, particularly in my case this time of year, we're even in January, we are doing a Christmas tree collection. You can donate to East Cheshire Hospice, and they'll come along and get rid of your Christmas tree and, get rid of it for you.
If you're in the area, obviously.
If you're in the area.
Not nationwide, that's for the Cheshire area, but it's just another way that Nod's getting involved.
They recycle the trees.
Yeah.
Okay, and are you going to be helping with that, Noddy?
Probably, yes. I've got my fitness cloak on, so yes, I'll be trying hard.
Not how many trees you can be able to lift, to be honest.
Yeah, how dare you?
I may have to give a hand with that. Yeah. He once volunteered to do a skydive, and I had to step in and do that in his place. Well, I'm not.
I had a cold.
Yes, he's a national treasure. We have to be careful.
He is. What else will you be doing for Christmas? Will you be riding down on the hillside in a buggy that you've made?
Well, we will. We will be doing that. We are spending this Christmas, actually. with our brand new in-laws. Our young son, Django, he got married in June. So we are going to his in-laws and now our in-laws for over Christmas, we think.
Yeah, I think we're the outlaws.
Unless they kick us out, you know. So we're hoping to spend Christmas lunch with them at least.
Well, Susan got the fact that I was quoting your song to you, even if you didn't then.
I did.
I do know the words, Kay, after 51 years. Mind you, it does get a bit hazy sometimes. I usually put rude words in where they shouldn't be.
Oh, well, don't do that on the telly. It's the breakfast show.
Definitely not.
What do you do when people play the song? Do you play it at Christmas?
We don't play it at Christmas, no, but in the morning. Tell them what I do on Christmas morning, Susan.
Yeah. So if you think that shout is loud when you hear it on the radio or when you're in the supermarket, when
it's Christmas, doesn't he?
When he shouts "It's Christmas" in your ear to wake you up on Christmas morning, it's very loud on the pillow. It's
oh, what fun we have!
How the years have flown by. Yes, no, it is a very unusual alarm clock. But it works. It works, doesn't it? Yeah.
Well, it wakes the whole household. That's the thing.
It's good to talk to you both. We're going to have to leave it there. But thank you very much indeed for joining us. We'll make sure that we mention the hospice on our Twitter feed, and hopefully you'll get a lot more pickup as a result. So here it is. Merry Christmas, everybody.
Merry Christmas Day! Yo! Ho, ho, ho!
In the last 5 years, more than 13,000 farmers have left agriculture in the UK.
Is it going to be viable for the future?
No farmers, no food! The frustration, the anger, the fact that so many of them are at risk of going bust has now become too much.
You've got to keep hope because one day it's going to be okay.
I'm Dan Whitehead, Sky News' West of England and Wales correspondent.
It's scary what's happening in the country.
It's the illegal migrants that we don't want here.
How difficult is this to police tonight? Off the scale. Having the police speak to us so starkly right in the middle of the riot showed just how serious the situation was. The water on board the barge contaminated with Legionella bacteria, an outbreak that was first revealed by Sky News. There have been questions for months over whether the support offered to asylum seekers on the bivvy is sufficient.
A cruel place to put human beings.
From busy cities to rural communities, we spend every day reporting on how big decisions impact real people. The last smoke and steam rises into the sky above Blast Furnace 4.
Today is a day in history for Pollard.
The closure means more than 2,000 job losses.
It just seems madness.
It is a highly contagious infection. South West Water did apologise again.
This is the Revenge Porn Helpline.
They're helping terrified victims.
You've been a victim of a very common type of online crime known as sextortion.
We're making things better for people.
Stonehenge became the latest victim of Just Stop Oil.
Now I can say I've been to the orange Stonehenge.
Sky News, get the full story first, free, wherever you get your news.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
This conflict. They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes. Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show here on Sky News Monday morning. Let's return to the latest situation in Syria now, should we? Tobias Ellwood, Defence and Security Analyst, is in the region as we speak to him this morning. Hello to you, Mr Ellwood. Always a pleasure to talk to you. My goodness, it was warp speed, the dismantling of the al-Assad regime.
It was quite amazing to be here at this conference with Sergei Lavrov, the Foreign Minister for Russia, and Abbas Araghchi from Iran, suddenly scuttling away to have emergency talks because everybody was caught on the hop. Syria is clearly at a crossroads with this dramatic departure of Assad. But, you know, I can't help reflecting how his fall could have happened a decade earlier ago had Britain not voted to step back, as we did in August 2013, after Assad had gassed his own people. America then followed suit, and that allowed Russia and Iran to fill the vacuum. But of course, those two countries are very much distracted because of other events now. And that's allowed Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, as they're now known, along with other military factions, to take advantage of a demoralized Syrian army, very unpopular government indeed, to push down and overthrow Assad.
For now, they are still a terror organisation as far as the UK is concerned. I did speak to Pat McFadden on behalf of the government this morning. He said they would be looking urgently at that. That's the right decision, do you think?
It is. I think it's worth just, again, stepping back. As we ask what next for Syria, it's helpful to understand this land, this complex history that dates back to the cradle of civilization. It's situated on the crossroads of 3 continents. Its rich but turbulent history has resulted in this complex, sectarian, multi-ethnic, multi-tribal patchwork that defines Syria today. And all these groups are now vying for territory and influence. And in many cases, they're backed by powerful regional proxy support. For me, the future for Syria, having visited the country a number of times, is actually a federated model that respects that history, that respects the differences, the disparate networks that are set up there. No individual power base can actually run the country from a centralized position. Unfortunately, if we don't get it right, civil war will ensue, and that will allow terrorism, extremism to flourish. It'll allow movement of modern slavery, and of course, weapon systems to move about as well, not least through Hezbollah into Lebanon, who will attack Israel. So it's in our interest not to blink again, but to actually lean into and support the Syrian people that have been calling for change for decades.
Hamish Breton-Gordon, who I'm sure you know, was on the programme a little bit earlier on this hour, and he was telling us that there's a lot still of chemical weapons stockpiled in Syria, and that needs to be dealt with urgently.
Yes, and that's another problem we're here. You're dealing with a state that has managed to stockpile a lot of military-grade systems that, if falling into the wrong hands, could further and complicate the war itself. All the more reason why there needs to be some form of technocratic council, that we have a ceasefire that allows a temporary governance structure to be put in place while a political resolution is made. My concern is if that Britain and America absent ourselves again, and I'm conscious of what Donald Trump has already said, we gift this to Iran, Russia, and Turkey to then carve up what they think should be the future of the country. And that will actually only benefit certain elements, certain ethnic groupings, certain tribes in Syria. And that cannot be in the wider Syria's interests.
Why do you think, Tobias Ellwood, the Russians and the Iranians, despite having promised to support the regime, pulled away and didn't offer the support that they needed? He's now, I think, in Moscow with his family.
Yeah, I mean, that's the big question. I think the timing of what HTS did was deliberate. They realized that Russia was on the back foot, distracted by what's going on in Ukraine, and certainly after the pummeling that Iran had received from Israel and so forth, again, distracted by what's going on with Hamas and Hezbollah. They chose their moment wisely. But it wasn't just HTS, it was an entire country. that was fed up with the economic demise of the country, the authoritarian regime. And don't forget, this is actually 50 years, over 50 years of brutality by the Assad regime, because before Bashir, there was his father, who was equally brutal, Hafez. And so now various groups from the south, the north, and so forth are all vying, as I say, to expand their own territory. And but there are other camps. I mean, Russia actually has a base on the Mediterranean. The Americans have a camp in the southwest as well. There are so many proxy voices here. Everybody does need to get around the table to make sure that there is a sense of calm, a measured approach to working out where Syria goes next.
How concerned are you that a vacuum will be created, as we have seen, as history tells us, in the region?
Well, we should learn from what happened 10 years ago. When we absent ourselves in this way, then that vacuum is filled by authoritarian regimes, regional players that have their own vested interests at heart. And you look at the map as to where Syria sits and its influence on Lebanon, its influence on Israel, its influence on Iraq. A stable Syria is in everybody's best interest. A stable Syria will lead to a stable Middle East, and that will help, the wider geopolitics of the world as well, because it's all interconnected. What happens in the Middle East doesn't stay in the Middle East. And the biggest concern I have is the rise of extremism again. I mean, HTS, they say they've moved away from Al-Qaeda, but that's where they came from. And they aren't the only ones. Daesh is still there as well. There is much work to be done here. There's a lot of plates spinning across the world for the West, the international community to think about, but every effort must be made to try and support Syria as it works out where it goes next.
OK, we must let you get back to your conference. Thanks very much indeed, Tobias Ellwood. Thank you. These are live pictures, as you can see, from Damascus. And these are also live pictures from Seoul. A travel ban has been imposed on South Korea's president. He's being investigated over allegations of rebellion after last week's declaration of martial law. Opposition parties have submitted a motion to impeach him that is expected to be debated later on this week. Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you here on Sky News, the rise and fall of Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria. We asked the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee how stability can be restored in the region. Chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Emily Thornberry, is with us. It's good to see you as always.
Good
Thanks
morning.
for joining us. Warp speed, what's happened in Syria? What happens next?
Nobody knows. I can't sit here and tell you I know. I mean, it has always been, hasn't it? Everybody wants to celebrate, and rightly so, that we've seen the end of this murderous regime. This man who, as a result of the war, probably 500,000 Syrians have been killed. More than half the population are either internally displaced or refugees across Europe. And the most terrible most terrible stories we've heard. I mean, I think the worst one that I heard was the killing of children and their bodies being dumped on the doorsteps of their parents, you know, that sort of intimidation that's been going on. But the concern has always been, if Assad goes, what next? That's always been the concern. And the thing about Syria is that it's probably one of the most mixed countries in the world. People don't realise that. So there are Kurds and Alawites and, you know, and 16 different types of Christian religions and all these different all these populations, and then obviously a large Sunni population, different types of Shias. And so for that country to continue to be able to function properly in a way which isn't sectarian, when we seem to have the capital that has been taken over by the Sunnis and by an extreme form of Islamic jihadi Sunnis, is obviously a matter of concern. I mean, they're saying the right things, but their background is something else. So their background is in Idlib, where there have been some terrible things happening. And as I say they want to be pluralist. They say they want to adhere to people's rights. I certainly hope that they will adhere to women's rights. We've yet to see. I mean, it's very early days. But the difficulty is, I think along with everybody else who loves Syria, feels a great sense of elation that Assad is gone, but real worry about what the future holds.
Should they be taken off the terror list?
I think it's early days. I think we need to look into it. I think it does take quite a long time normally for a group to be taken off a terrorist. So we would need to expedite that if we decide that we want to. I mean, obviously, we want to influence Syria in the best way possible. And we can't do that without talking to people. But it really depends who it is that ends up in charge. I mean, there are different groups. I mean, there are Kurds coming down from the north. There's another group coming up from the south. We've got the group that's in charge at the moment in Damascus. Lots of different groups, lots of different countries with interests in Syria. So we just don't know how this is going to shake down.
A former colleague of yours, a former chairman of a select committee, Tobias Elwood, was on the programme earlier.
Right.
And he was suggesting that we do have to take them off the terror list. But also we have to accept some responsibility for not voting to support the Americans back in 2013 when he gassed his own people.
I think that brings me back to my point about what happens next. If Assad goes, what happens next? And that was always a question that people couldn't answer in relation to Syria. And we ought to learn from history. We know what happened in Iraq. There was chaos, and Iraq is only just now starting to be able to sort out a future. We still see chaos in Libya. People talk about cut the head off the snake, but you get a dead snake. I mean, you need to be clear about what the future... You can't do regime change just by, we don't like this regime, we're getting rid of it, let's see what happens next. That's irresponsible, and we need to stop that pattern of behaviour. As I say, I have always wanted, for there to be a brighter, better future for Syria. The question is, no one was ever able to show us a clear path to that future.
Putin's got a bloody nose over this one. One wonders why he didn't support Syria. He's purposefully didn't. Some suggestions that his attention is much more on Ukraine.
I think that he's having a much more difficult time in Ukraine than people realise. I think it's having a deep effect on their economy. They're having to spend a huge amount of money on defence and security.
30-odd%, I think.
Yep. Their inflation rate is, getting out of hand. They're having to cut back on social security. They're having to increase taxes. So many people have lost their lives. It is a real strain on the Russian economy. And so I think that they have to focus on that because that's near at home. That's the centre of their interests. Syria they want to have influence in the Middle East, and obviously to lose Syria today means it's a really big blow to his status and his standing in that region of the world.
And his footprint there, because he has an airport that he used previously and also a seaport.
That's right. That's right. And the question will be, will the Russian fleet still be able to be in that part of the Mediterranean without their alliance with Syria? And air power has been their gift, essentially, to the Syrians until now, and they've held back on it because presumably their focus has to be on Ukraine, because Ukraine is incredibly important to Russia, just as it is to us.
While I've got you, I have to ask you about what's going to happen in January and our relationship with the United States once President Trump takes power again.
It's another unknown, isn't it? I think the important thing is to try to look through. I mean, he's very unpredictable, so we just literally don't know. But there are certain principles. He wants peace. The world wants peace. So the question is, how can we align our interests on that? How can we make sure that there is peace, that there are deals done, and those deals stick? Because what you don't want is you don't want to have, like we have had, like really in so many places, where you have a sort of where there's a conflict and it gets frozen and people kind of put a sticking plaster on and go, oh, that's all right, that'll do. But it won't do because it'll blow up again. So what we need to do is be working with the United States to try to find a long-term peace solution for Ukraine, for the Middle East, that is not defeat in Ukraine and is a lasting peace for the Israelis and the Palestinians.
Should we be working closely with Brussels as well? We know that the Chancellor's over there today.
Of course we should. Of course we should. They're our closest neighbours. They're the people that we do most of our trade with. They're our friends and relations. We can't go back into the European Union, but we can certainly have a better relationship than we have at the moment. I kind of feel like we've had a really nasty divorce and we need to start patching it up again.
OK. I can't let you go without asking you, off topic, being a middle-class woman of a certain age, how did you feel about Greg Wallace's behaviour?
It's just the entitlement. I think that's what it's all about, isn't it? There are some men who just think they're entitled to insult women and make jokes about women, and if we ever challenge them, they're so amazed. They're just like, what? What do you mean I can't behave like this? Well, you can't. You're in the 21st century, mate.
And so say all of us.
And so say all of us.
It's always a pleasure to see you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you. Will's standing by. Hi, Will.
Hi, Kay. Yeah, we're building up, of course, to 10 o'clock, of course, top story of the day, as it has been for you, as well as the developments in Syria. What a fascinating story. And as you were getting at a little bit there with Emily Thornberry, we'll be exploring the implications more broadly for the region and for Russia too. Michael Clark will be with us and we'll be going in detail on those topics as well. Does it perhaps also show a sign of greater weakness amongst some of these nations with similar leaderships, whether that's Russia or Iran, underneath the surface than perhaps we realise at the moment? We'll also have full team coverage at the top of the hour as well from Deborah, from Ali and from Ivor, as you have had throughout the morning. A little bit of a focus as well on European politics and UK politics as well. Kemi Badenoch went to Washington, of course, and today Rachel Reeves addresses the Eurogroup finance ministers' meetings, which I think would have been the focus of the day had we not had the Syria developments, and trying to set out her stall on what she sees the ongoing relationship between the UK and Europe on economic terms. That and very much more coming up at the top of the hour.
What do you mean getting out there a little bit? What are you trying to suggest, Wilf?
Getting out there a little bit?
Yeah, you said I was getting at that a little bit in that interview that I did with Emily Thornberry. I thought I got under the skin there.
Oh, absolutely. You've been getting out of it throughout the morning. I don't know what I said exactly, but there we go.
OK, I'll let you off. It's nearly Christmas. It's good to see you. Thanks very much. We'll see you from 10. Thank you.
See you then.
See you then. Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you here on Sky News as the Golden Globes release their shortlist. We'll hear who's up for an award.
In the last 5 years, more than 13,000 farmers have left agriculture in the UK.
Is it going to be viable for the future?
No farmers, no food! The frustration, the anger, the fact that so many of them are at risk of going bust has now become too much.
You've got to keep hope, because one day it's going to be okay.
I'm Dan Whitehead, Sky News' West of England and Wales correspondent.
It's scary what's happening in the country.
It's the illegal migrants that we don't want here.
How difficult is this to police tonight? off the scale.
Having the police speak to us so starkly right in the middle of the riot showed just how serious the situation was. The water on board the barge contaminated with Legionella bacteria, an outbreak that was first revealed by Sky News.
There have been questions for months over whether the support offered to asylum seekers on the bivvy is sufficient.
A cruel place to put human beings.
From busy cities to rural communities, we spend every day reporting on how big decisions impact real people. The last smoke and steam rises into the sky above Blast Furnace 4.
Today is a day in history. Remember Pollard?
The closure means more than 2,000 job losses.
It just seems madness.
It is a highly contagious infection. South West Water did apologise again.
This is the revenge porn helpline.
They're helping terrified victims.
You've been a victim of a very common type of online crime known as sextortion. We're making things better for people.
Stonehenge became the latest victim of Just Stop Oil.
Now I can say I've been to the orange Stonehenge.
Sky News, get the full story first, free, wherever you get your news.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to the Breakfast Show here on Sky News. Monday morning, the whole gang are here, but we're talking Golden Globes. Good morning.
I'm starting to get very exciting now. Golden Globe nominations are out. We will hear from who's nominated for what at 1:15 this lunchtime, so we'll be able to tell you all of the results and bring that here on Sky News. But for us within the entertainment world, it is officially the sort of start of all the award season chatter, and you get to know which names are going to be the ones that we're going to be talking about lots over the next few months. Go on, then. Ahead of the Oscars. Well, this is the thing, though. What we should start by saying, though, is the race is completely wide open this year. This time last year, everyone was saying, oh, Christopher Nolan, it's going to be Oppenheimer that gets everything. And it did. And it was a fairly boring award season for that reason.
I tried twice and I fell asleep both times.
OK, let's not get on. You're going to love what I'm about to say then.
I did the same with Barbie as well, though, to be fair.
Barbie was robbed. Oppenheimer, I found decidedly boring and too long, I'm sorry to say.
It was a masterpiece, I think, are the words that we're looking for.
It was art, but did I want to sit through it?
Well,
anyway,
like that
to 2025.
It's a film that everyone is talking about called The Brutalist. So Oppenheimer was 3 hours. The Brutalist is 3 hours, 35 minutes. So long that most of the screenings that they've had at film festivals, they factor in a 15-minute interval halfway through, so there's a countdown that comes on and you can all go and have a wee. But it is meant to be, I haven't seen it yet, a cinematic masterpiece. It is about a Holocaust survivor who is a Hungarian visionary architect, and him, the immigrant story of him restarting his life in America. It's very long. The director that has been sort of criticised for making the runtime this long says, well, look, surely it's about story and content, which this has. You wouldn't criticise a book for being 700 pages long and make it be crammed into 100 pages. I possibly would criticise a book for being 700 pages.
I am that soldier that had to watch Dances with Wolves, which is nearly 4 hours, so...
Yeah.
That was a bit pants.
There you go. But The Brutalist is going to be the one that everyone's talking about. More of the fan favourite, though, will be Wicked, which is doing so well at the box office. Equally quite long, though, in terms of runtime, but I think it is the one that certainly the critics have loved, the fans have loved. It's a good chance that we'll have a Brit nominated for Best Actress with Cynthia Erivo. Likely Ariana Grande will be up for Best Supporting as well. But in the Best Actress category, while we will all be rooting for Cynthia Erivo, she's got some tough competition, we think, because it's the return of these big blockbuster names that might be nominated this year, like Angelina Jolie, who's played Maria Callas in the sort of biopic of the opera singer's life work and her career. So she could be going head-to-head with Angelina Jolie. It's going to be a tricky year all round. around, really.
Did you see the thing about Wicked where apparently people were being triggered because she was green, and so they had to put a disclaimer at the beginning? It wasn't fair on green people, apparently.
I kind of don't buy into the clickbait of that, though. No, but don't you get the reason behind that? I mean, it's talking about race and things, so it is. We agree to differ on
a spokesman said.
Timothy Chalamet, shall we segue into Timothy Chalamet?
Yeah.
He's played Bob Dylan, and everyone thinks a complete unknown might get him nominated for Best Actor. He sings in it, he plays the guitar in it, despite having never done either before. So it's quite a sort of what we like about award season is. Oh yeah, I forgot that. Yeah, I raised that. I think he played the guitar for the first time. She's getting more factual there. But yeah, look, he by all accounts does a really good impersonation or his version of Bob Dylan in this. The singing is great in it. The guitar playing is great in it. So it'll be interesting if he can beat Adrian Brody for The Brutalist when it comes. So we're talking about Golden Globes. No one really cares about the Golden Globes. What we care about is the Oscars. If he goes head to head with Adrian Brody in the Oscars, and beats Adrian Brody. Adrian Brody is the current record holder for the youngest man to win for Best Actor for 29. Are you following it? It's the stats, the Oscar stats.
I'm making a long list of films I need to see at the cinema this weekend.
But he's currently the youngest Best Actor winner for Oscar. If Timothy Chalamet beats him, he will then be the youngest Best Actor winner.
But
can Timmy do
Chalamet
it?
has had some challenges in his private life, hasn't he? So will they take that into account as well? I don't know.
Interesting. Is Gladiator 2 or Dune 2, are they worthy of any nominations?
They will be undoubtedly up for all the sort of technical type ones, but storyline, would he call it Best Picture? I'm not sure about either of those. Denzel, however, surely has to be up for Best Supporting Male, I would have thought, just because he is the standout of Gladiator 2, really. But I think it's very unlikely you're going to hear Paul Mescal being sort of up for
Rhinos. I mean, come on.
It was impressive. I think Ridley Scott had the time of his life making Gladiator 2. The big budget that they had and the amount of fight scenes, but it just kind of lacked.
Yeah, my favourite phrase about because I don't. If you laugh anyway, rhinos are just unicorns that have let themselves go.
Oh, I like it.
It's good.
What else? Ted Danson as well. Are you watching Netflix at the moment? Inside Man is lovely. It's a lovely sort of very short sitcom. Set with Ted. When did Ted Danson get old? Set with Ted Danson in playing the sort of private detective that's in a care home. But he is up for the Golden Globe. We already know by default because he is up for a Lifetime Achievement Award. So it's going to be nice that everyone is going to be singing Ted Danson's praises this time around. But this is a lovely comedy as well. So it is definitely worth tuning into. Nice half-hour duration, which is what we like. Okay, we can manage that. 3 hours 35 of The Brutalist might be a bit too long when you work breakfast hours.
Exactly that. Black Dobbs, love Black Dobbs.
I haven't seen this yet. Keira Knightley is meant to be
Keira
really
Knightley is good. She's good. Ben Whishaw, brilliant.
Can't go wrong.
It's tricky to picture Paddington as an assassin. But you get past that.
Are there marmalade sandwiches?
No.
Okay.
No, but he's very, very good. It's a bit raunchy at the beginning.
Ooh.
But then it sort of settles down a little bit. And, of course, the magnificent Sarah Lancashire.
She can do no wrong.
She can do no wrong. I would highly recommend it. 6 parts, Netflix.
Ooh, I like a good TV tip.
Yeah, yeah. Do you like that? Okay. And so we'll hear when?
1:15 is when the announcement is made. The actual Golden Globes will be taking place on January the 5th.
OK, good. Bit of Wizard of Oz. Do you watch Wizard of Oz at Christmas time?
Not really. I'm more of a Muppets Christmas Carol gal.
That's a shame, because we've got Wizard of Oz.
The ruby slippers, what have you done with them? Give them back to me or I'll... It's too late. There they are, and there they'll stay.
Except they didn't, because they've just been sold for $23 million at auction.
No.
Yeah.
They were listed to go for about $3 million.
Yeah.
And the phone lines went ballistic.
Yeah.
And this is one of about 4... She wore many pairs during the course of the film when she was, 16? There's only 4 pairs that exist. One set's in the Smithsonian. This pair is remarkable because they were stolen back in 2005, I think. And the guy that stole them, a professional thief, knew that they had an insurance policy of $1 million, so assumed that they were covered in jewels and gems. It's not, it's just sequins.
Wow.
And so they then disappeared. FBI heist, got them back.
I mean, the timing of selling those slippers, though, now, right after Wicked and all this hype. I mean, I know social media at the minute is just awash with all things Wizard of Oz, all things Wicked. The popularity of this whole story is through the roof. So you can imagine if they tried to sell this a year ago, I can't imagine it would have made maybe half that, even though they are still an incredible artefact of something that we all adore.
Yeah.
I know. Maybe they didn't get the memo that there were 3 others out there.
But if you went to a party in those shoes, they look really beaten up. You'd have to actually kind of go with the certificate and say, no, these are actual Wizard of Oz shoes.
I wonder what size they are.
23
I imagine
million
she had quite
party.
small feet.
I'm sure she probably did. Yeah, but they were recovered by the FBI in 2018. They were gone forever, like 13 years, finally found them. But you'd be really disappointed if you spent, well, maybe you wouldn't, $23 million and then realising that there's 3 other pairs out there as well. Yeah. And they're not very shiny either, are they?
No, they look a bit beaten up, don't they?
Do they use like a shoe tree to keep them fresh after almost pushing 100 years?
Are you actually asking me that?
It's a question that I'm considering. Like, he's having to wear gloves.
Yes. Have you put some Febreze in there? Nice insole.
Do they use the ruby slippers in Wicked?
Oh, no, now you're asking me. No, I don't think they do they?
I haven't seen it yet. It's on my list.
It's all pink and green.
I haven't seen the film. I've seen the stage musical probably about 3 or 4 times now, and I think they certainly reference it, but it's not really, Dorothy's not really a main player in the piece. So if they do come up, the shoes are there, but they're not a main
mentioned in
of it
passing.
at all. Yeah. Not to give any spoilers away.
I'm sorry about that. OK, lovely. Thanks very much indeed. 1:15.
Yes.
Are we taking it live?
You're taking me live.
Yeah. Excellent. It's worth tuning in at 1:15 then, isn't it? And 10 o'clock in a few moments' time with Wilf, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye for now.